We're going to build the wall. We have no choice.
When he ran for office, when he was campaigning for his first presidency, build the wall was a great slogan. It was a great rally cry. Put it on a hat, put it on a sticker, put it on a t-shirt. But for Border Patrol agents, it was the entire package. Personnel, infrastructure, policies. Not only was it the physical steel wall, it was the access roads to the border. There's places where we still can't get to the border because we don't have all-weather access. All that was part of this big package, and that got cut off on day one of the Biden administration.
May God bless
That's
America.
why this current big, beautiful bill that has all the funding in there for border security and infrastructure is so vitally important for years to come. Again, it's not an immigration solution. It comes down to border security is national security.
Let's say there's 15,000 people in a group that are streaming across the border. Is there a point at which you would either be authorized or decide to use deadly force to keep a group like that coming across?
Great question.
Since the Civil War, dogs have stood alongside our military, proving to be indispensable partners. Our military prioritized ensuring proper canine nutrition for optimal performance, recognizing its vital role in mission success. Team Dog embodies that standard, offering science-based, customizable meal plans tailored to your dog's unique needs. Developed by a former Navy SEAL and canine trainer, Team Dog Food ensures the highest quality nutrition for our canine companions. Improve your dog's well-being. Be your dog's hero with Team Dog.
Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome my next guest to the podcast. He's a former Chief Patrol Agent of the U.S. Border Patrol. He's been serving CBP across the southern border and in D.C. for 30 years. He just finished an appointment as the Senior Advisor to RFK Jr., Secretary of Health and Human Services. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Chris Clem.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming. We've been trying to get this worked out for a while, and we finally made it happen. I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule. I know you're super busy, and being able to sit down, as everybody watching knows, and most people who don't live under a rock, the border and Customs and Border Patrol as an entity for the last really several decades have been kind of at the forefront of national policy and political campaigns and both sides of the aisle kind of going back and forth and almost using it as a political football to score points with each other, either trying to ding CBP or trying to support them and just going back and forth. As somebody who's spent, most of your adult life within that organization, from its inception as it relates to where you came in and started there as to where it is now, what do you notice is the biggest change?
It's a great question, and again, thank you for having me and the platform and your audience. I love the fact that we can come in here and just have an honest conversation about what's going on. But I started in 1995, right? And I grew up. I'm from New Orleans. I grew up in Houston. Went to South Padre. That's the only time I ever saw Border Patrol or even heard of Border Patrol. Yeah. And I was in college. It's down the road here in Huntsville when we heard Border Patrol was hiring. It's a federal agency. That's what I wanted to do. And I just thought I'd get my foot in the door. And it was a very obscure agency. It was less than 5,000 people when I signed up in 1995. And really where we are today, and you're exactly right, it has been used as a political pawn by both parties. One demonizes it to go with an emotional, political ideology. The other, champions them, and they play us in the middle. That to me was one of the hardest things, because we were really, as an agency, especially as an agent and a supervisor, when I started commanding stations, you had to get a little bit of that political savvy knowledge because you had to deal with the community leaders. And then certainly when I became a senior executive and a chief, that was part of your role, was to interact with Congress and stuff. But Border Patrol agents as a whole, we'd rather be out there in the dirt, in the mountains, on the water, laying in, tracking, and not being in front of the camera, not seeing us on TV, just minding our own business. But unfortunately, over the last, like you said, decade or more, we became politicized. And some people took a lot of advantage of it, to include a lot of the talking heads within the agency or the political appointees. And then the media ran with it. And again, it's a tale of two sides, or two coins. You have the emotional plea that there is a victim, which is the poor innocent migrant, and the boogeyman who is the Border Patrol. And that's where the politics come in. And you see it play out every day. You're seeing it play out in real time right now across the country with these anti-ICE raids, and they lump them all together. But at the end of the day, it has become that political pawn, and politicians on both sides have used it. And that's the sad part, because it comes down to border security is national security. They have taken immigration and made that the critical point of securing our borders, and that is just one faction of it. But the most important piece is the national security and public safety piece. And I think that's how we're going to finally fix this. If we can get some common sense on both sides to say, let's focus on the national security piece of our border, not just the immigration. We got a long ways to go to fix immigration, but securing the border can be done, and can be done pretty quick. And we're seeing it play out right now under this administration.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to see the change from January 17th to the 25th.
Yeah.
Like that week period.
Yeah.
Or so. I mean, it's just, I think further highlights the not even incompetence of the former administration, but the actual intent to not fix it, to say, well, there's nothing I can do. It's like, there's so many other things you take executive action on. And if Trump can come in and in a week, completely, 180-degree polar opposite change the overall kind of energy or vibe of the border, I mean, I think tells you everything you need to know. I know within the military, I was fortunate enough to spend time under multiple administrations, both Democratic and Republican, and then also come back as a trainer with yet another administration that was an opposing party. And, to me, I was fascinated by the culture and morale and kind of the overall level of energy and optimism or lack thereof, depending on who's kind of running the show in D.C. and not. I assume that it's the same with Border Patrol. Like, do you see roller coastering of morale and desire to want to be there or not, depending on who's in charge? Oh yeah, I mean, it really comes down to, and you know this, if your highest commander, in this case the commander in chief, the president of the United States, and the executive is behind you 100%, the morale trickles, just like on a dog leash, right? Yeah. If the handler's having a bad day, it goes down to the dog. 100%. So I'll jump around here, but when President Trump won in November, I was fully engaged in the campaign in different ways, and obviously I live in a border state, so I was talking to my former colleagues and all my friends that are still in the Border Patrol and with ICE and all the investigative agencies. And when Trump won, it was like that scene in Braveheart where William Wallace is saying, hold. That was their mindset, just hold till January 20th, right? Because then they know they're going to be allowed to do their job. So the morale, literally the boost of endorphins that kicked in, knowing we're going to have the boss back in charge, it's going to take the handcuffs off us and allow us to put the handcuffs on the bad guys. And, I mean, it just was super exciting. I got to witness it firsthand for the first 100 days of this administration when I was up in D.C., hearing the stories, talking to people. It was incredible. But you mentioned something, too. You talked about incompetence. Look, we knew, and I guess when you add Trump 47, that's 6 administrations I was part of. We know that politics is going to ebb and flow. We understand there is a clear difference between Democrats and Republicans. It's gotten even more divisive and more extreme over the last few cycles, but the incompetence is what we thought. Okay, this administration ran on undoing, or the Biden administration ran on undoing everything Trump did, right? So we expected a little bit of initial pushback, and we're going to be a little more sympathetic and open border mindset. But we never thought that they would literally peel back things, stop things. Like, you can say all day long, well, we're against building the wall, but there are contracts, we're going to finish it, and no new wall. No, they stopped everything. And we thought, okay, this is going to last a few months, and they'll get on plane, they'll get the right people in, and they'll start listening to us, and they'll shift the focus away from the border. No, it went from, okay, this is just new politics, maybe this is just some incompetence, and then about 6 months into it, or probably less, we knew this is all focused and purposeful, and everything. There's a meaning behind it, and really the biggest like spike of the football that ensured that happened was when you go back to September of 2021,
1st September of this the Biden administration was that Del Rio Horse Patrol incident.
Yeah.
Because because it was completely utter failure on the border. They had approximately 18,000 people show up at Eagle Pass illegally in the United States within a 72 to 96 hour period. They didn't know what to do. They were panicking. And when that image gave them a talking point to say, look, it's Border Patrol's bad. We're trying to help. Look, they're abusing these people. That was an opportunity to deflect it. I was sitting there as a chief in Yuma, 1,000 miles away, and I was just like sick to my stomach. I can't believe the secretary, the vice president, and the president just lied to the American people. And I said, folks, if there's ever an indicator that this is intentional to demonize us and victimize, or play the victim for them, like, the poor migrants, the Border Patrol doesn't know what they're doing. That was that moment. And the numbers just continued to skyrocket, and just utter intentional failure for a purpose. And I still believe that it is to shift electoral college. It's try to get census. Because remember, when Biden came in, one of his executive orders was changing the census, because Trump originally had said you must be a citizen to count towards the census, because that's who your representatives are. I still believe that was kind of their main focus, was take red, make it purple, take purple, make it blue, make blue even stronger. Because otherwise, why would we inherit and take in 20 plus million people that are going to be a burden on our system? So it was all purposeful. And the worst part about it was our agents were suffering. They didn't have, obviously as a chief, we were doing everything we could for them. Our supervisors and the agency tried to do everything they could. But when things were pulled out from underneath us from the White House and the political appointees there, it was taking a toll on our agents, the mental health of our agents. We had I think the largest amount of suicides in 1 year, I think 22 across Customs and Border Protection. 14 were Border Patrol agents, which that was unheard of for us. We know military and we know law enforcement has a high risk, but for that to happen, and I'm not saying it was the border crisis that caused it, but if you had no value or felt no worth and you were suffering at home physically, emotionally, financially, or whatever, and you came to work and you're basically still process and release these people, and your president of the United States is calling you, you're going to pay for strapping these people, and they're lying, I think I could take somebody that's in a bad place and make it, a worse situation. That to me just angered me to no end, knowing that we couldn't make a difference from policymakers. And my goal, at least for the remaining part of my career, was to try to do everything I could to back my agents' play, give them what I could give them. And ultimately, it was just sheer incompetence and this ideology of we're going to open this border and we're going to let people go. Everybody gets multiple bites of the apple, regardless of what's happening. And remember, we're still dealing with COVID and shutdowns, but yet we're letting people in from 177 different countries came in under the Biden administration.
So there's a couple things that I'd like to, I guess, dive further into.
Yeah, because I was kind of all over the place there.
It's a great synopsis for sure, and I appreciate it. So there's the kind of walking through the timeline. There's the first few months of, hey, whatever Trump did, let's undo it and kind of, punch him back in the mouth, so to speak. Yeah. Then you start to realize, okay, there's more to it than this. There's an actual intent. The kind of assertion of the only logical or even semi-logical explanation would be to try to shore up a voter base to increase the likelihood of far left-leaning policymakers to stay in office. But I'm curious, for somebody at your level and above, you're in a lot of meetings and have, relationships with people that the kind of sled dogs don't. Yeah. And I'm curious, and I think a lot of people wonder, at what level or what magnitude, rather, were there discussions within kind of the higher echelons of CBP that either addressed that was the case, or wondering if there was more to it than that, if there was any type of strategy to combat it? Is that something that you guys would discuss amongst yourselves at the higher level?
Great question. Typically speaking, under the Biden administration, we were very insulated. The chief patrol agents, we had our weekly meetings, and it was really just Green Border Patrol leadership, the chiefs and some of the headquarters elements, and we would hear about the conversations, the department, which would be DHS, and at the time, Secretary Mayorkas. We would hear that the commissioner, which was a career that had been politically appointed into this as an interim commissioner, that they were talking. It was the biggest issues that were coming out, that all we ever heard was process quicker. You don't want, especially Yuma, like we literally have 3,000 to 5,000 people in custody. Now I had 950 agents, that included myself. And I wasn't out, it was a luxury to get out into the field and actually go catch people. But it was all about processing. How quickly can you process people? What resources do you need? Those were the conversation. It wasn't, hey, why don't we shut down this section of the border? Why don't we implement this policy and prosecute everybody that comes through here to deflect it from coming into the border? It was all about, they're coming, we don't want anybody to die or get sick in our custody. How quickly can we move them? And that became the biggest pull factor. And that was what was happening in all the political appointees at the department and at the CBP level. And all we would hear from amongst the conversations amongst us chiefs were, well, I need 20 more computers and I need more buses. All this was about how quickly you can get them out. And the biggest concern that I saw, or at least I heard from the department, was we didn't want anybody to die or get deathly ill in our custody. And having led sectors in El Paso, we had several people die while they were in our detention facilities. Then they just come in with pitchforks after us. Like, you murdered these people. It's like, no, there's 3,000 people showed up in 3 days and we're trying to process. Yeah. And so that was the frustrating part, is we would hear these comments and we're like, well, you're not slowing down the flow. What are you doing, State Department? What are you doing, White House? Why aren't you telling Mexico City, knock this off, shut it down? Because you know what? Trump 45 did. Yeah. They wouldn't do that. They were more interested. Listen, I had calls on Saturdays. They would call me and say, hey, we noticed that IT ran a query, and you were only maximizing 50% of your processing computers today. That was the calls I was getting from headquarters. Yeah. And I was like, well, because there's 3,000 people out there, you didn't send me any additional bodies to help process. Oh, and I've got 4 flights that we got to, put these people on planes to go to other parts of the country so they could be released. And you know what? My people don't want to come in and work overtime on a Saturday to process and release somebody any quicker. So guess what? We're only going to do 50% of that. What are you going to do about it? Yeah. Because they didn't want to hear that story. Right. But that was the mindset from people that were decision makers, that were the conduit from CBP to the department to the White House. So there were a bunch of yes people up there, why is Yuma backlogged? Well, let me get you. Oh, yeah, gotcha, Chief. You weren't processing as quick. Yeah, because we only had this going on and that going on. That was the biggest problem, is there was nothing we could do at the field. They weren't listening to what we had to say. They were hearing what or should I say, I don't know how we'll say that, but they heard everything I said. They just weren't listening or acting on it because they were very critical of any of my comments, any of my comments to media. And, I was one of the last of the old school chiefs that were still out there. And I knew I had a big, I felt the heat on the back of my neck from the White House. I figured that was why I ultimately retired. I had at the time 27 and a half years in. I had more than enough time to retire, and I just was going to go out the way I came in on my terms, and I was not going to be pressured. I was asked to stay, but because I could not make a policy decision because headquarters was changing that, because they wouldn't let me adjust things. That was the biggest problem, is you put leaders out there to make a difference. I was not some technically savvy computer border patrol agent. I was a knuckle dragging guy. I like to be out there and mix it up and find solutions. And the solution was shutting down the border, was finishing the wall, was putting something up in lieu of wall if they weren't going to do that. It was prosecuting everybody that came in here. Yeah. Instead, it was, no, how quickly can you process these people and get them out? And, we did everything we can to be right. I knew where that line of subordination was, or insubordination. I would lean as far forward as I could, but I also wasn't going to give them a reason to lob my head off because of their politics. And it was frustrating. Last thing I'll say on that, and it probably will take us down to another topic down the road, is I could not make the policy decisions anymore because of the White House. What I could do is take some money and invest it back in our agents and ensure they had everything that they needed. We got them some more training, some mental health resiliency training, brought some speakers in there, made sure they had all the good equipment in the weight room and things like that so they could, at least take some of that time. Instead of spending 10 hours a day processing, they could at least do 8 hours processes and get an hour workout in and do some training. Something to, because they couldn't go out there on the line. And we had times where there was 6 agents covering 126 miles because we had so many people to detain and process.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I mean, it's frustrating to even hear that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's not really a protocol or any sort of recourse for upper echelons of CBP leadership to be able to do anything other than just voice frustrations. Like all you can do is say, hey, this is a problem, hey, we need this, and they either shut it down or not, and that's really it. There's not like, with some police departments, there's internal affairs, mechanisms to be able to, circumvent your immediate boss or their boss or whatever, and there just doesn't seem like there is that there, huh?
Well, you could do that, right? So obviously we had internal affairs. So if there was something criminal, we have whistleblower protection, things like that. But this was the problem: is the policies that were or the laws give latitude to the executive, and the executive writes the policies, right? So, and that's the executive branch. And again, you may not have to like it. It's just like what's going on today. A lot of people just don't like, not a lot of people in the public anyway, don't like what President Trump is doing. But it's legal. Right. He has the authority. That was the same thing under Biden.
Yeah.
The problem was it was jeopardizing national security and public safety. Catching and release people without proper vetting is jeopardizing the American people. Yeah. Rounding up, if you will, or doing raids on criminal aliens is not jeopardizing public safety. It's actually enforcing public safety. Right. So that was the big difference. Now, if we had, if there was criminal wrongdoing, we certainly could report that. There was no doubt about that. The problem is even as a chief, I could be matter of fact to the secretary, which I did on more than one occasion when we'd meet. I was like, you're in charge of ICE as well. You run the detention programs as well. Why are you making Border Patrol release? You need to turn them over there. You're a secretary. You can reach over to DOJ and say, open these prisons so we can place these people.
Yeah.
It's a funny story. We had a conversation in Washington, D.C. with all the chiefs and a couple of the CBP folks, and Ali Mayorkas, the secretary, showed up. And he started asking some questions, and I'm like, right here, I got your answer. You're the secretary. You run these programs. You're a cabinet secretary. You can reach out to anybody across the cabinet and make this happen. Why aren't you doing this? And of course, I'm looking at the commissioner, and he's going, oh gosh, Clem's on a roll. And one of my other chiefs, who retired shortly about the same time I did, he also stood up and said, yeah, and I agree. And this was actually kind of a cool story. I basically told the secretary, called him out, look, you have detention. If you're worried about how we're releasing people, why don't you start detaining them? Why don't you put them in ICE custody? Why don't you put these temporary structures in ICE facilities so the community is not having to absorb this, right? So I'm giving him my 2 cents, and he's feverishly writing it down, or he's writing a note to send Clem to Point Barrow, Alaska, or something, right? But when that meeting was over, my phone blew up. From text messages from people around, hey, I heard you just told the secretary. I'm like, yeah, because people were frustrated. Yeah. Absolutely nothing came of that other than Clem's a wild card. Yeah. No, I'm just being honest, and I was giving you solutions because nobody wants problems; they want solutions. I gave the secretary his solutions. That right there told me he wasn't interested. He was just playing a little game. And my relationship with Mayorkas goes back to when he was the deputy secretary. And it's kind of like that old Looney Tunes where the sheepdog and the wolf would, good morning, Ralph, good morning, Sam. They'd be very friendly, then they'd fight, and then they'd check out and do it. That was kind of my relationship with the secretary, was we had that, there was a little bit of mutual respect. I respected the position he held, and he respected the fact that I was going to be, matter of fact.
Right.
But I don't think I'd piss on him if he was on fire, and I don't think he'd do the same thing to me,
Were there any repercussions, like actual repercussions from you voicing that?
Not really repercussions. I would get the phone call, hey, next time, just do it this way. I'm like, look, I am who I am. Yeah. I didn't get here because I was sugarcoating things. The biggest ones where I knew they were really watching is when we'd have some national news. For example, like CNN did an interview because they were obviously wanting to push CNN under the Biden administration, and they sent me the secretary's talking points. I'm like, and of course the whole time this is Yuma. They're not talking about nationally, they're talking about Yuma. So I did the interview with CNN, and once it aired, they being somebody from DHS Public Affairs reached out to my chain of command in DC, and they called us like, hey, so you didn't use the secretary's talking points, and they're a little upset. I'm like, well, I'm not the secretary. Yeah. They wanted the secretary's talking points. They interview him. Yeah. What I did is I said, here is point one. Here is how this applies to Yuma. It doesn't. Over here, this works in Yuma, but this doesn't. And that was a little bit of all right, let's keep an eye on Clem. Right. And then we got this new commissioner for a very short term, Magnus, who was like the worst thing we could have had was a Tucson police chief that they made the commissioner. And it seemed like he was going to be the guy to try to, push my buttons. And the good news is he ended up stepping down before I retired. So I won that one. But there was a few little indicators that, you know what, Clem is, not playing ball right. I just wasn't playing by their rules. Yeah. The rules were the Constitution, the rules were the Homeland Security Act, the rules were the Immigration and Nationality Act, and the rules were taking care of my employees, my agents, and my staff, right? And most importantly, making America safe as I could in Yuma. And it was crazy. So, there was rumors, when Clem's announcing his retirement, he must be getting the 3R letter and getting, no, I didn't. I did it on my own terms. I was asked multiple times to stick around. I was like, no. I'd worked away from my family 9 of the last 10 years, coming home on weekends or once a month or a couple times a month. I was ready to be with them. And I was also not going to, like I mentioned earlier, I am not going to let them chart my course, them being the administration at the time, because if they would have just reassigned me to Washington, D.C. in some corner counting paper clips. Yeah. I wasn't going to do that.
So it sounds like if you kind of simplify it to, who to point the finger at, essentially, is that, if you guys run up the chain of command, here are the problems, here's what we need, and it's not happening, ultimately it falls on the House of Representatives, generally speaking, that they're the ones that can make the changes, even going against a president, or I guess if you can kind of dumb it down for the listener of where the failure is, like where is that weak link that ultimately is not doing what they're supposed to do and forcing the problems to continue to exist under, extreme advising from the people on the ground doing the job, saying we're not getting this and we need it.
Well, it all starts with the White House and the executive branch, because, as we mentioned, Congress appropriates and puts the laws in place. As we learned, we didn't need new laws. We just needed policy, and policy comes from the executive, saying you will catch, you will process, and you will prosecute, or you will catch, you will process, detain, and remove. That's what we're doing now. Versus Biden, you will catch, you will process, and you will release. Because they do have that latitude given to them as the president and as the cabinet secretaries. So when it comes down to it, the finger pointing and the blame starts with the White House and domestic policy that directs the cabinet secretaries on where they need to go when it comes to whatever, in this case, we're talking Mayorkas ran immigration enforcement and border security as the Secretary of Homeland Security. The blame was him and his political cronies that underneath that made those decisions. Again, it wasn't against the law to catch and release, but it was definitely a problem, knowing that we were impacting the communities and impacting the country. The Congress is responsible for the appropriations of all that. So you could blame them if they didn't give us enough money. Yeah. But
the policy is
the policy comes down to the executive, and it's exactly what's happening right now. The good news is somebody who is a border security hawk. This is exactly what we should be doing. And who has lived on the southwest border, other than a few little tours in D.C. and New Orleans, for almost 25 out of my 30 years on the border. And and it works.
Yeah.
When the border is secure, the communities are safe. When the border is secure, both parts of Mexico and the United States in that area are safe and healthy. It's good commerce. People can go back and forth. But when it's out of control and the cartels put a stronghold there, it's not safe for anybody. And that's all policy coming down from the White House. And again, Congress can certainly put stricter language in any laws or any amendments to laws, and they can do the appropriations and say, and they do that all the time under oversight. And they love saying, like they're doing right now, we want to go into this ICE facility over oversight. They put that in appropriation language so they can have some of the controls. So they share some of the blame, but the problems we see at the border and the solutions, and like we're seeing right now, that comes from the executive putting the right person in office and building the right team.
Yeah. I'm curious where, if at all, discretion can play any role. So, the hypothetical or the analogy I would give is, a cop pulls you over for speeding, and he comes up and depends on his mood, it depends on how fast you're going, it depends on your attitude towards him, how you're carrying yourself. There's a lot of nuance to it, but they have discretion to say, no, I'm taking you to jail because you're doing 21 over, or looks like you're having a bad day and I'm not, I'm about done with my shift, so, just try to slow it down. Is there any ability for you guys to do that? Or I'll throw a hypothetical at you, is that, look, okay, even though Biden's policy says shall release or will release or whatever the language is, what if, say, the Tucson sector head guy says, I know that's what it says, send them back. Then what?
Yeah, so great question. So we do have discretion to some extent. First of all, one of the nuances we have is you have criminal and civil actions. Just like in the speeding example, they can criminally write you a ticket for 21 over, or they can just do the administrative ticket, right? In border security, if someone crosses the border illegally, means they enter outside of a port of entry, it is a criminal offense, 8 U.S.C. 1325, okay? It's been on the books for almost 100 years. But we can also just administratively process them for removal. And that gives us discretion. So if you cross the border illegally, I could arrest you and I could criminally prosecute you for that, or I can just administratively process you for that. So you'll go through the immigration judge and the removal process and either sent back or allowed to stay. On the criminal side, they would charge you with up to whatever the criminal statute allows. And then we would still be able to deport you. That's the beauty of the immigration. It's not a double jeopardy. But we did do that. We did try to prosecute people or detain them. And that was really my direction as chief. Anybody that comes through here or has this background, or we are going to prosecute them. But the U.S. attorney makes that final decision if they're going to accept the case or not, which is politically appointed by the president. So the U.S. attorney wouldn't take a lot of those cases. Yeah. ICE, an agency that we are dependent on for detention and removal. If their directions are coming down to saying you're only going to detain those from these countries or those with these criminal or immigration histories, otherwise you're going to decline space. So we could request removal, detention space or prosecution, but we didn't control those decisions because it was outside of our agency. Yeah. So we were dependent on additional agencies that were being controlled politically too. So the U.S. attorneys are all politically appointed. So they're just like, we're not going to take a simple, illegal entry case. We'll take a criminal smuggling case if there's danger, or if we catch a narcotics case that had X amount of, pounds of coke or weed or whatever the time was. They had the discretion, and it always put it on us. And this was to kind of put it in a little more perspective. If you put the immigration enforcement cycle to like a 24-hour clock, Border Patrol is responsible for about 1 hour of that clock, but accountable for the whole thing, because we can't say no. Somebody crosses illegally, it is our job to go out there and arrest them and do everything we can to arrest them. Once we got them in custody, we take their biometric data, find out who they are, we go to process, and we set them up for removal proceedings, which the next case or step would be turn them to ICE. ICE can say, no, we don't have any room. We don't have room for females. You gotta let her go. We could call the U.S. attorney and say, we want to prosecute this person for entering illegal. They're like, sorry, we don't have enough attorneys to do this. We could even catch somebody backpacking cocaine across the border, and DEA could say, yeah, we don't have any agents available to respond, just, seize the dope and kick them loose. We could never say no. So then we're stuck holding people until we could get a bus to release them into the community. And again, Border Patrol could maybe not catch them, but you're not going to find many agents that I ever knew that wouldn't at least try to catch them. Sometimes you just get outrun, or sometimes you lose them in the desert. But it wasn't because we didn't try. And again, everybody else in that enforcement continuum could say no.
Yeah.
We couldn't. And then we're stuck holding people, and we're waiting to find out if we're going to have space to detain them. So next thing you know, you're sitting there with 100 in custody, then it becomes 500 in custody, and then a group of 1,000 come across, and you're sitting there holding all these people, and the bus broke down. So now we're sitting. It was a mess. Yeah. It was a mess. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, no, you did. I guess I'm curious, and forgive my ignorance on the protocol or the potential repercussions should you approach this, but I'm curious, do you know what would happen if whoever is in the position to make the decision at whatever sector we're talking about, whether it's at that level or even the one higher next level, is if kind of circle the wagons, bring it in. Hey, I know what the rule says, but here's what we're actually going to do, and we're going to catch them, we're going to process them, and then we're going to drive them to the border and kick them back across. That's what we're going to do. Like if you guys were to do that, instead of what's being directed by the executive branch, do you know what would happen?
Honestly, here's what I think would happen, because we did it. It comes down to, if you get, I don't want to say caught, but if you embarrass the administration, then you're gonna, it's gonna look bad, right? So they don't want to look bad. What typically would happen, they would open up an investigation, and that administration, the Biden administration, they'd find something that would stick. They would find something that said, you know what, this is where you clearly, they would open up an investigation, they would say it was insubordination, they would malfeasance, whatever. Internal Affairs would drag it on. Hopefully you'd had some good people in there and saying, well, I can see it looks like he violated policy, but he didn't. But I can also assure you that the leadership, whether it's a sector chief or a station commander, they're not going to knowingly violate the law. Like I said, I knew where that line was. I would lean as far forward until somebody told me no. Sometimes, it's better to ask forgiveness than to ask for permission. Yeah. And the problem, too, with that scenario would be Mexico. Because under Trump 45, and of course under 47, but under 45, Mexico was like, I can tell you examples, like when we were working with them, and I would be in Juarez or Mexico City, or even, it would have been Mexico City or Juarez at the time. It would be like, hey, Jefe Clem, what can we do to help you? It's like, well, I need this, this, and this. They're like, we'll make it happen. Or we need to send this many people back every day. We'll make it happen. Under Biden, it'd be, Jefe Clem, let's have a cup of coffee. There's not much I can do for you anymore. Because what happened was Washington under Trump was putting pressure on Mexico City, and they were responding. Under Biden, there was no pressure. And so in that hypothetical, if they were to send people back to Mexico that was outside of the desired policy, Mexico would scream bloody murder, and that's how we would find out.
And so is the potential repercussion-wise for the people in the position to direct something like that to you guys, like they could actually go to jail for that?
I don't think there's a criminal. These would all be administrative violations, so there would be no criminal offense for returning somebody back to Mexico through the normal protocol if it was just not the policy.
So I guess what's the worst thing that could or would happen?
They try to administratively remove you or fire you or something. Well, we saw that under one of the chiefs in El Centro was pushing the envelope. I had since retired, but he had pushed the envelope with some things and found himself detailed to Washington, D.C. to some obscure position. Yeah. Because what was happening is he was cut from the same cloth I was. We were both trying to get the truth out there. Yeah. And so that's probably what more than likely would happen. When you're a senior executive in the government, they have this famous 3R letter, and it basically is retire, relocate, or resign. And that's what they do to senior executives. Anytime you relocate on a permission or a position, whether you're promoted or reassigned for a good reason, you go from a small sector to a bigger sector, you get a 3R letter. But if you piss somebody off, you also get a 3R letter that says you're being relocated here, and if you don't want that, you got your other options of resigning. That's more than likely what would happen, because I feel very confident that the leadership that I was part of, that team, and the teams, the levels beneath us, they were never going to cross that line of criminal, and they didn't want to get their heads lopped off. They had families; they wanted to make sure that they can take care of themselves, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody would have gone to jail. Yeah. However, I would not have put it past the administration, the Biden administration, going back to that horse patrol situation in Del Rio. If there was any evidence or facts that they had physically assaulted somebody, they would have made an example of them, and they would have thrown the book in and tried to put that person in jail. Fact is they lied to the American people. The Biden administration lied to the American people. Nobody got strapped. There was no whips. We didn't carry lassos, any of that kind of stuff. But if they would have found something, because they built that lie so big, they'd have to follow through with it, and that would have been a situation that I think they would have tried to put somebody in jail.
To me, it's interesting that particular case in that, you have people who are breaking the law, and there are example after example after example every single day in this country of police officers and law enforcement professionals using justified physical force and aggression and use of force issues to either capture, detain, et cetera. And there's I won't say there's never a problem, but there's rarely an issue with it.
Right.
So to me, like the fact that it's even being made a big deal out of tells you a lot about where the administration was at. Because from my perspective, even if that had happened, right? Even if all of the I don't know if you call them cavalry or what you call them, but anybody on horseback, like I don't think it's a bad idea to have lassos or fucking net guns or what tasers, and if somebody's approaching you and is danger close within the boundary of personal space and there's a potential threat there, like I would use reins to smack somebody to keep them away from me and the horse. Like I don't see the problem with that, even if that is what happened.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, especially in the situation where there was thousands of people on that line in that river. There were literally food carts on the Mexican side, and that's what was happening. This family was going back and it was organized chaos. They were trying to get to the people to process them and see who the heck they were, and they were going back and forth to get food. And this one guy took the food from this family. And that's when the horse patrol guy came in, is like trying to get this guy and move him away. But to your point, when you're up on a horse, and I've been on horse patrol, I mean, if they grab that rigging, they control that horse, and it's a problem. So, and if you're being assaulted as an officer, you do whatever it takes. Yeah. And so if that was the case, but they completely changed the whole deal.
Yeah, because I mean, how many other examples are there of agents where, if you're tracking or chasing a mule and he fights back or whatever, where, they're detaining him. However, if it's
I'm gonna punch him right in the face. That's the first thing to do to create distance if I have to, right?
If it strikes me, there's instances of guys getting shot, being bit by dogs. I don't see why that's any different and why it was made such a big deal out of.
It was made a big deal because it was politically efficient for them to demonize the Border Patrol, because they immediately, if you've never ridden horses professionally or working horses in this case, they use the split reins to work the horse. All right, that's just how it is. And people on, at the time, Twitter didn't know what it was. Yeah. The caption, it was actually an iconic picture, right? Of the guy, the agent on the horse, the chaps, the cowboy hat, and the water splashing up, the guy running. It's a great picture. But again, the not to get on to that subject again, but that really, if you wanted to look at the 4 years of Biden and the border, it's that image. That was like the turning point that said this guy does not care about border security, does not care about his border patrol agents, and does not really, honestly, doesn't care about the American people if he's going to lie to them like that, blatantly, and then follow through with that lie. And I think the only thing that those agents ultimately got administratively charged with was using harsh language in front of children.
Man, that's crazy.
I mean, well, I can tell you, when you're in the heat of the moment, you're going to say things, right?
I mean, again, I mean, again, like if you don't want your kids to hear swearing, don't drag them across the border.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
You know, I mean, to me, it's unbelievable that that's even a thing. I'm not naive to the fact that this is way easier said than done, what I'm about to ask. And I would liken it to the COVID vaccine predicament that the U.S. military found itself in. And to me, what I'm asking would be the same thing as that if basically most of or the entire U.S. military said, none of us are taking the shot, you're going to have to fire all of us. You know, were there ever any discussions or even thought processes in relation to that kind of insubordination on such a level to where it would actually change the policy, where if you know, everybody bands together and says, we're not releasing anybody, we're going to kick them back in the border, you know, none of us care if you fire us, like, you know, the whole strength in numbers thing, was that ever even?
I think that's what they wanted. They would have loved, Biden administration would love for Border Patrol to walk out.
And just fire everybody.
Yeah, I think that's what they wanted. They wanted, remember, abolish ICE was part of the people that that campaigned on behalf of Biden. They abolish Border Patrol would not be, they know we got to secure the border, but they didn't want to secure the border in that sense. So I think that would have been the problem would have resolved itself if Border Patrol would have said, you know what, we're not following this mandate. We're not going to catch and release. We're just not even going to catch people. In fact, we're going to use all our sick leave. We're just going to call it a green flu, and we're not going to show up. We're concerned about COVID too, so we're not coming to work. Yeah. I think they would have loved that to happen.
Well, I guess, not so much not showing up or saying, hey, we're not going to do what you say, but even taking it a step further and say, we're not going to release a single person. I don't care what echelons of the Mexican government, throw their hands up or send smoke signals to Washington, D.C. saying they're not doing what they're supposed to, is that if every sector, every guy on the ground just said, no, we're throwing them back over the border and tough shit.
Yeah.
Was that ever even thought of or discussed? Because at that point, what could the Biden administration do if every single sector chief were all kind of in cahoots and said, hey, if we all stand up, going back to the Braveheart thing, hey, if we all stand up, they can't fire the entire Border Patrol. So if we all do it, what are they going to do about it?
Yeah, that'd have been good. I wish I would have kind of really could have got everybody to do that. Yeah. I think, to the extent we could, we tried. Yeah. We had Title 42, we had COVID going on. There was people we could send back. The problem was it was so inconsistent. And, Mexico could shut the port down on their end and we would not be able to send anybody back. I guess we could push them through a hole that they came in. I mean, those kind of things would happen. But we have histories of people getting in trouble. We used to call them river VRs, where they would, agents would identify who they were and just send them right back. And it's like, no, you got to take them into custody. I mean, I guess we could have done some of that and keeping them out of the communities. But I tell you, I had 950 agents and probably another 150 staff. We were catching over 1,100 to 1,200 a day. Yeah. And again, when you take 950 agents, days off, 5 stations, sector staff like me, you're looking at maybe on a fat day, 200 people over a 24-hour period, and we were catching 1,000 plus a day. Yeah. We were outnumbered 100 to 1. We wouldn't be in a situation to turn people back. And we had groups that were literally running from us to go into town, knowing that if they got into town, then we'd have to bring them back. And it was just it was really true chaos at times. Yeah, no, it would have been hard to do that. I mean, I wish we would have done it. I guess what would have happened?
Well, again, it's very easy for me to sit here and say, hey, why didn't you do this when I'm not going to lose my job if that happens, and my family's now not supported, for me standing up for something like it, and I'm not naive to that. Yeah. Just a thought process as somebody who, has just kind of observed over the years, and I think quite a few Americans share the same frustration that I do, and especially what you guys do. You mentioned the processing thing, and I do see the sense in, and frankly agree with, not just saying, hey, turn around and head back, you're caught. I do think it's valuable to identify who it is in whatever capacity. Can you walk through, A, the processing process,
sure,
and B, Does it have to be done at a station? Is there a technology piece that could be incorporated where agents in the field have either iPads or something that they could do it on the spot in a matter of seconds or minutes and then turn them back?
Yeah, yes to both those. I'll answer the processing process for you, and we do have that technology. In fact, that technology was very beneficial under Title 42 because we wouldn't even bring them into the holding facilities or at the stations. We'd catch them in the field if they were Title 42 eligible. I think it was a mobile I don't know if it's a brand name or it was like a mobile biometric identification system, MBIC or whatever. We could do the 10 print slap, take their picture, get their basic information, and if they were from one of the countries that we could send right back, we would do that. They wouldn't even come into the holding facility. So that could happen, and we use that. ICE uses that in the interior all the time. But typically, I would just say this was the matter of fact. When somebody was arrested by Border Patrol, they would be brought into Border Patrol stations, and they would, obviously we'd give them a health screening, especially when you look at the Title 42 in the COVID era. If someone just looked deathly ill, you separated them. But typically a physical screening to make sure that they, obviously we pat them down, make sure there's no weapons, whatever. Get their basic information, get their basic biometric information, and we're going to take a 10 print, fingerprint, and photograph, and we're going to run that against our database. Here's the problem. Database is only as good as the connectivity with our national crime index, our immigration history, our criminal histories, and any of the few countries that we share information with. So if you are a criminal in some third world country that we don't have access to, we would never know because you would never show up on the fingerprints as having a criminal history. That's one of the big problems. Yeah. But everybody's data, photo and fingerprints and information they provide us is captured. And then again, as we mentioned earlier, the next step in the continuum would be placed in a removal process and would be turned over to ICE, and they would wait their initial hearing from the judge, and the judge would decide if they get to stay or go. Yeah. Regardless if they're claiming asylum or whatever they want to claim, they cross the border illegally, we have the opportunity to detain them, charge them, and process them. And so we take that information. The problem is you hear about vetting. Vetting is a lot different than just running a simple ID check. That's following through their country of origin, where they passed through. You get somebody from a terrorist nation, and you take their fingerprints and it comes back no record on file. That shouldn't be good enough. They're coming from a country that have state-sponsored terrorism.
And they would tell you that they're coming from that country?
Most of the time they would, or they had some kind of information, their passport or from their country. We're in the people business, so we're going to figure it out because we'd have to figure out a way to communicate with them. And they would tell us, what language they spoke. If we didn't have anybody that spoke Farsi, so we'd have to get interpreters on the line, and we could get that information. But that's part of the vetting process. This person's going to be held until we find out who they are. The system didn't always allow that, and we just took a basic fingerprint, came back no arrest warrant, no criminal history. They say we have no other way to disprove what they're telling us. ICE says we don't have space for them. So we have to let them go. And then 10 days later, that information bounces off of an FBI database, says, hey, this guy does have a connection to somebody we're interested in. And it's like, well, where is he? I know, we turned him over to ICE. ICE released him. That's the problem.
Yeah, and there's no way basically to just throw them across back, just take them to the border and say, get on the other side. Well,
that's what we initially did under the Migrant Protection Protocol, under Trump 45, and then we've implemented that to some extent, I think, under 47, which is if you came across the border illegally and you want to claim asylum, because that's what they all want to do, because that's the buzzword, okay, you can do that, but you're waiting back in the last country that you came in. That was the agreements we had with Mexico under the Migrant Protection Protocol. People call it the Remain in Mexico program, but it's actually the Migrant Protection Protocol. Go back to Mexico, and you can wait till it's your turn to come in that way.
Which to me,
but Mexico also is a sovereign nation, so even though they pass through Mexico, they're like, well, we don't want this Venezuelan, we don't want this Afghani, But Mexico that's another issue, is their constitution basically allows for that free flow of people. So we have to, it takes some diplomacy to work with them to make sure that they're not violating their own constitutional laws. And that diplomacy is really having somebody with a backbone in White House,
To me, that's the most logical and easiest solution is for the president to call the president of Mexico and say, hey, my guys are if people are coming over from your country and you can't get a handle on that, you're going to have to deal with it if we catch them because we're sending them back, and we'll figure out a way to put them on your side.
Well, it shuts it down, and it's worked. The MPP, and I think President Sheinbaum is tries to play. She's supposedly very progressive, and over the last president they had in Mexico, but she's trying to work with us to the extent that I know, but she's also trying to be this progressive, president of Mexico. But at the end of the day, we've seen it work, and we know that President Trump doesn't mess around. If he says he's going to shut down the ports and end all trade with Mexico until they get this right, he'll do it. And they don't want that.
Right.
And they tried to call his bluff before, and he shut down ports of entry.
Yeah.
And so that is, you pass through. You're allowing this threat to enter our country, and you're doing nothing about it, or you're doing minimal about it.
Yeah.
A lot of that's changed.
Yeah,
we've got a lot of good cooperation with Mexico right now. The current numbers are like unbelievable. Last week, I think it was 93 arrests were made along the entire southwest border, and less than 30 gotaways. Look, in December of 23, they were averaging 10,000 or more arrests a day.
That's crazy.
Yeah, again, not my line, but if we didn't need a new bill, we needed a new president.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that policy seems like a no-brainer to fix it without having to really incorporate any heavy lifting on our end. Just say, hey, do this, or this is going to happen. This is probably going to...
Mike, I think it goes beyond that. I think it goes even better. I think I'm going to say this from, and I probably may not say it very eloquently, but look at this from a Northern Hemisphere national security protection plan. We should end it at, when they come in from Central America. Keep this whole region, this whole Northern Hemisphere, this whole Canada, Mexico, and United States, keep that secure.
Yeah.
Work together. No one should come in illegally with the intent to traverse any of these countries, if you will.
Yeah.
It becomes a national security issue.
Yeah, well, and I think that singular policy does that, because if I'm the president of Mexico and I know if there are people coming from contiguous countries to the country of Mexico and trying to make their way into America, and they do, and now we're stuck with them. Well, guess what I'm doing? I'm
shutting it down at Oaxaca
and
Guatemala.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortifying the shit out of every border we have
Yep.
to avoid having to deal with that, and it's a domino effect.
Yep.
But this is probably going to seem like a dumb question, but mentioning people from originating from countries that are either state sponsors of terrorism or have a historical background of that. Did you ever come across, it's kind of a two-part question. A, did you ever come across people with either fake fingerprints or worn off intentionally, any of the higher speed masks, like anything to try to deceive you guys as to what their actual biometric information is? And the B part of that question is, how hard would it be to trick you guys if it was a known terrorism affiliate individual that knew that they had a record, but let's say they had a skill set that was beneficial for them to be here, being a lone wolf, et cetera? How hard would it be for them to bypass or trick you guys in that way?
Well, nowadays I think it'd be very difficult because the sheer numbers are down. When you're dealing with 10,000 people a day, it's a volume and flow control. Things are obviously going to slip through the cracks.
The hat on the coffee table sitting right in front of me belonged to Glenn Doherty. It was a John Deere hat that I gave him. He had it when he tragically passed in Benghazi. Bubs Naturals is a tribute to Glenn. They have collagen peptides, which I put into my morning routine every single morning, as well as the functional creamer / MCT oil that goes into it as well. They have hydrate or dielectric electrolyte drink mixes, which are great for pre-workout, during workout, and post-workout to get all the added sodium, potassium, magnesium, et cetera, that's required when you deplete it. Bubs is a family company. the way that they started is, again, super close to my heart, with him being one of my closest friends for a long time. And I encourage you to go to bubs.com, and now there's a landing page specifically for Mic Drop listeners. Just enter the code Mike, M-I-K-E, all caps, and you get 20% off your first purchase at bubsnaturals.com. So that's www.bubsnaturals.com/Mike. And you can check out the Mic Drop landing page and go support an amazing cause.
Never, to my knowledge, did we ever encounter anybody that had some kind of mask that would try to, conceal facial recognition and devices. Fingerprints, yes, it was a known tactic to put like super glue and do things like that to distort their fingerprints, so you couldn't get a good loop and whirl, ID on them. So that's not out of the way.
What do you do in that case?
Well, depends on the circumstances, right? If I don't know who this person is, and what was the totality of the circumstances? Was it just because it happened a lot when they were like the migrant farm workers? They just didn't want to get caught. Or know that they had been deported 10 times because they were working in these fields, and it was they would mess those fingerprints. Plus they were laborers, so they were going to have messed up fingerprints to begin. They're hard workers. But if that was the case, if I personally, and my directive from whether I was a supervisor or a station commander or sector chief, when in doubt, you prosecute them. I would rather detain somebody and prosecute them for their illegal entry. That means I'm holding them a little longer. That allows the system a little longer. Somebody to ask one more question, get one more in-depth interview. Because if those spidey senses go off, if something's not right, and then this guy's got some weird fingerprints, that should be a red flag. And it is by most agents. They're going to say something's not right here. Caught him by himself or with some other person that's a criminal or something, and this person's fingerprints are all jacked up. Yeah, I mean, that's a no-brainer from my perspective. Detain them, prosecute them. At least that means we're going to hold on to them a little bit longer. And I'm going to let the U.S. attorney know, hey, this person was caught doing this. We're charging him with this. His fingerprints have been manipulated in some way, shape, or form because it looks like they've had super glue on them. Something's going on. We need to prosecute this person. And we would do that. Now, as far as what the technical, peel back some layers, how do we continue to find out who this person is? I guess we would go some DNA testing or do something. But at the end of the day, my experiences is once you started holding them and you were prosecuting them and they got their public defender, and they're gonna probably kind of come clean, like, all right, this is who I am. I mean, but as we all know, some of these people that really have bad motives are trained and very well positioned to conceal everything about them. But the other thing I'll say to that is we do know that a lot of these folks from around the world, at least in the past, had taken up shop in South America, Central America, Mexico to try to blend in and learn the culture. And when you got people from Middle Eastern countries that are speaking better Spanish than I was, you're like, something's and you're not some business executive.
Right.
You're living in some obscure town in Guatemala. Yeah, we're going to ask a few more follow-up questions. We're going to call in the Joint Terrorism Task Force to do some deep dives. We're going to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you mentioned over 170 some countries.
Yeah.
People were, caught coming across, and that's just for who was caught. Do you have tangible examples of legitimate known terrorists that have infiltrated our border, come across, been caught, and captured, and then turned over to the terrorism task force? And
yeah. So my 2 years in Yuma as chief, we had year one, so 21, it was 16,000 arrests, and then year two was 312,000 arrests. Now that's up from 8,800. So in fiscal year 20, there was just over 8,800 arrests. We skyrocketed to 112 and did 116. And in those 2 years, I think it was 116 and 115 116 different countries in Yuma. We also, I think in 22, had the most people that hit the terrorism screening database. We had 40 known. Now, just for context, some of those were like, they weren't always, Al-Qaeda or ISIS terrorists. There could have been, our affiliations. It could have been somebody that was from Colombia that was FARC, right? Or sounded like, or a family member was a high-ranking FARC member, right? So they're in that system. Every one of those hits, the Joint Terrorism Task Force would come out and they would do the interviews and they would follow up, and it was a directive of mine. Sometimes people didn't follow directive and I would deal with them administratively, but they would be prosecuted for their illegal entry, and FBI, everybody would document all that stuff. I do not know of, at least in Yuma, where somebody that we caught was like high affiliated with an ISIS or an Al Qaeda or some kind of a Hamas. We did not catch that, right? Also, we all know how this works. We may not even have known, because some of those other three-letter agencies would have, be following up, doing a better investigation, or I shouldn't say better, but an additional investigation. Not always going to get that back-sided intel, because the need to know would be very limited. But I can tell you that at least the 2 years I was chief in Yuma, we had great cases. We had people that had some interesting ties. But as far as somebody that we caught them with the battle plan, that didn't happen. Yeah. But that also, again, statistically speaking, we're catching 300,000 people in one section of the border, 126 linear miles of border. We caught 300,000 plus people, and we had 50, 60,000 gotaways.
You have no idea.
We have no idea, right? And that's the one alarming piece, and that's what you hear like Tom Homan and everybody else talking about. It's like, it's not what we're catching.
Yeah.
It's what the Biden administration forced us to do that allowed, millions of gotaways. Yeah. Again, statistically speaking, there's some bad hombres that were in there.
Yeah. So speaking of the gotaway, does it only count as a quote-unquote gotaway if they were visibly seen, chased, and you guys didn't catch them?
Yeah, so when you enter the border, and we're talking southern border, because when I say northern border, it kind of screws up, because we call them turn back south. I guess they turn back north if it was the Canadian border. But when you cross the border, there's only a couple outcomes. You get arrested, you turn back south to Mexico, or you get away. And so what we do every day is we would report our apprehensions, report the turnbacks, and then report the known gotaways. And a known gotaway is somebody that we have physically seen. I saw them run. I grabbed 10, 5 got away. And I didn't have any backup, and I just couldn't catch them. So 5 gotaways, logged in. Video camera sees a group come across, and we never had an agent to respond. And we counted, looks like a group of 12. There's 12 gotaways. We never got a chance to catch them. Agents are tracking, driving down, and we call it sign cutting. And they see footprints going north. They call it in. They track them out. They're like, I never saw anybody. Nobody ever saw this sign. Those are gotaways. Then there's, so we have seen something that indicated that somebody entered, or we saw evidence and we never could resolve it. That is where 99% of the gotaways numbers come from. Agents, hands-on or line of sight, or through the video. Even if we have sensors, and we have some pretty high-tech sensors out there that can, biped or quadruped, we would know if it's a human or not. We still would do verification by physically going out there and seeing foot sign. That's 99% of those known gotaways. That's why we call them known gotaways. There is still sections out there, and I say 99%, I just threw that out there. It may not be an exact percentage. But there's areas of the border that we never got to. So there's that unknown factor. Like especially during the busy days in Yuma. 126 miles, and there was areas where we only had 5 or 6 agents covering all of that. And we really focused in the high traffic areas. So there was times where there was miles of the desert we didn't get out to for weeks at a time because we didn't have the resources to do it.
Yeah.
So who knows what came across?
Yeah, so the who knows, I think, is probably the most alarming. But, is it accurate to say that every inch of the border at least has sensor or camera coverage if there's no wall?
Yeah, I wouldn't say every inch, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
The whole idea is to have persistent surveillance and full situational awareness. And so we've got that goes back to, again, what Trump 45 did. When he ran for office, when he was campaigning for his first presidency, build the wall was a great slogan. It was a great rally cry. Put it on a hat, put it on a sticker, put it on a T-shirt. But for Border Patrol agents, it was the entire package of personnel, infrastructure, policies. Not only was it the physical steel wall, it was the access roads to the border. There's places where we still can't get to the border because we don't have all-weather access roads. It was the ground sensors. It was the video camera systems. All that was part of this big package, and that got cut off on day one of the Biden administration. Yeah. So the whole goal is to have persistent surveillance across all the border. Even in remote areas like Big Bend, Texas, where Mother Nature has done a pretty good job of her own wall with the river and the mountains, but we still need to have some kind of autonomous surveillance over there just to be that force multiplier for us. So we're getting there.
But it's still not.
We still got. That's why this current big beautiful bill that has all the funding in there for border security and infrastructure is so vitally important for years to come. Again, it's not an immigration solution. It's a national security and border solution, and that to me is the message. That's the only way we're going to bring people together. Is we need to secure that border, because once that's happening, then we can kind of address the compassion and common sense way of dealing with lawful immigration, so we can right size some of the things that we've done here in this country and make sure workers, if we can't find American workers, that you shouldn't go and bankrupt and lose a business loan because you can't find somebody to work for it because our immigration system's so jacked up. Yeah. But it starts with the security piece, and we need to secure every bit of that southern border, and then we can't stop there. We have to look at the northern border too.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. While it's probably unlikely, is it I guess accurate to say that there potentially could be spots along the southern border that have no cameras, no agents, and no sensors,
Yeah.
and that there'd be no way to know if
Yeah.
groups of people were coming across in that specific location?
Yeah, I mean, that is matter of fact. We're not there yet, right? But the agents know where those locations are, so they do get out there to the extent they can. That's why we've tried to really use, and I don't want to get into too much tradecraft here, but use everything to our advantage to reduce those spaces, right? There are just spots in West Texas, like I mentioned, Big Bend. There's spots in Arizona where I live that are just so difficult to get to because there's no access there, that the only way you're checking that border is 20 miles north on this one dirt road to see if anybody came through there. So we rely on intuition and instinct and other agencies in the community, but we're getting there. I mean, every piece of that border has got a plan for it.
Yeah.
And we just unfortunately had a 4-year setback, and now we're getting back to it.
Yeah. Obviously, you wouldn't want to dime out or disclose, where those spots are at. Do you think that it's safe to say that a lot of coyotes or people that's their line of work is smuggling people? They know right where they're at. And
They know. I mean, that's what that's the whole game. That's what they do.
But I assume it's also, to your point, if you're unable to put a wall there, obviously it's very difficult to get to. Like the likelihood that there's mobs of people being physically capable of getting through those areas is probably fairly slim.
Yeah, well, I mean, these areas that I'm talking about, especially in the remote, rugged areas of our southern border, are equally as remote and rugged on the south side.
Yeah.
So for them to get there, they've got, it's going to take some work.
Yeah.
But again,
so it's not going to be thousands of people.
No, it's not going to be that, right? It's going to be. It's going to be the ones that are really desperate, and that's the concern, right? If you are somebody that has grown up in the mountains of Afghanistan and hidden from the Allies for years, and you want to come over here, you're willing to go up in those mountains. So that's why we have to look at this from a national security perspective. Yeah. But we know where those locations are. We have Plan B, right? Like we haven't got the wall through there, or we haven't got the technology necessarily installed there to where we want it, but it's coming. Yeah. But we know where to look, right? And that's where this is where we use our other agencies. The Highway Patrol can keep an area visible, so we make sure people don't get picked up. That's why, why cooperating cities are so much better than sanctuary cities, because everybody's looking for that anomaly.
Yeah.
Who are these 5 people that don't look like the typical 5 people that may enter this town?
Right.
They don't speak Spanish, they don't speak English, and they just showed up. well, we expect a phone call and we can respond. But again, not to go down a rabbit hole, but the key being is there are areas that we all know publicize where there's gaps in the wall. Yuma was prime example, the Yuma gap. In fact, there was 2 gaps that were regularly, you could find on YouTube, instructing people in like 10 to 12 different languages to come through the Darien gap and then go through the gap in Yuma. Because the wall, basically the construction got turned off on day one of the Biden administration. The Morales Dam was always there because it was a gap in the wall there, and it took 18 months for them to finally agree to close that gap in Yuma by the dam. And that was our biggest problem because it was water, smugglers, and people. And that's not a good mix because people die.
Yeah.
And it took them 18 months to agree to finally finish that or close it out. It took them over 2.5 years to complete it. But the kicker was it couldn't look anything like Trump's wall. So it looks more like chicken wire. But it with the agents and the cameras there, it made a difference. But there's gaps out there. But I want everybody to know that every sector chief knows where those locations are. They put the resources to the extent they can out there to do that. We are working directly with Mexico. Again, we've got a little bit more. We got a president that pushes the envelope a little bit, and we're getting better with that. But the plan is we're securing that border, so we have 24/7 situational awareness and persistent surveillance on that southern border to protect America.
Yeah, that's good to hear. If the big beautiful bill gets passed, do you know ballpark time frame wise? If all of the funding, there's a light switch you can turn on, it's there. How long would it take to say we have the entire thing covered?
Well, you have the whole contracting mechanism that happens with government contractors, right?
Yeah.
It's good. Everybody on the contracting side is waiting for that bill to drop so they can send their request for proposals, or whatever that term is. Every sector chief's already submitted their plans. They know what it needs to do. This is really just waiting for the funding to drop, and then it becomes how quickly can people install what they need to install. So I would venture to say that, especially knowing how politically charged things are in this country right now, midterms next year are going to be a big thing. I got to imagine, knowing the people that are pulling the strings in this administration, it'll be all hands on deck, foot on the gas. They want to see these results happen before next midterm election, so they can say, look, we have answered the mail. We told you we were going to secure this border. The numbers don't lie. Not only that, but we've taken your taxpayer dollars and we finished what we started. We could get that. We'll have that done before this administration's over if we do not meet the resistance like we did under the second half of Trump 45. Because remember, he lost the midterms.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say he, but the Republicans lost control, and the Dems did everything they could to shut down all the progress we had been making.
Yeah. So, barring the bill getting passed,
Yeah.
should be before then. That's
Yeah.
good to hear.
Yeah.
I'm curious, obviously we're not at that point now, but, back when there were 10,000 people a day in certain spots coming through, this is a pure hypothetical, but I think it's relevant, or I'm curious if, A, there was ever discussions within the Border Patrol as to how you would handle it, and or if there was a red line that says, if this happens, we have to respond in this manner. And the question is there an amount of people or a manner with which they're streaming across where you guys would actually offensively engage them? Like, was that discussion ever taken place? And I realize that this is kind of like, when would you use a nuclear weapon kind of question. But there, to me, it's like thinking of it, if I'm in your guys' shoes, like, that's something I would at least want to know, because if let's say there's 15,000 people in a group that are streaming across the border, like, is there a point at which, again, a certain size or the way that it's going, where you would either be authorized or decide to use deadly force to keep a group like that coming across? Yeah,
it's a great question, because this former chief and former deputy chief had those protocols in place both in El Paso and in Yuma. The problem is just like any other hierarchy and chain of command, what the chief says and what is done, by the time it trickles down to that supervisor at 2 o'clock in the morning, and when the shit hits the fan, they don't always know when to pull that trigger, because it's just. But we did have our mobile response team. We had our entire group ready for any of those kind of large scale mass incursions. That was perfectly planned out. In fact, when I was in El Paso as the deputy chief, and that was where a lot of the conduit was coming through back in 18 and 19 and parts of 20 when I was out there, that was a huge area of concern for us because they could use Juarez, El Paso and Juarez was the largest international city in the world. And they had everything coming in. So people were making their way to Juarez. And then we had 1,006 people come through in like a 13-minute time frame in El Paso back in 2019, I think it was. So those were the type of signals and triggers. Like, we can't have this happen anymore. Hell, when we had the wall in El Paso, when it's not at the physical border, because it's a land border, when it's on the river, you can't put the wall in the middle of the river. So you have to kind of concede some U.S. territory. And in El Paso, we usually kind of had like a little concession of about 150 yards at the most to sometimes like 75 yards. But that wall was designed to impede, deny, control, or contain an entry. Well, it wasn't impeding or denying an entry because it wasn't in the river, but it can control and contain. And so I said, absolutely. If they're not going over the wall, let them sit there. They're not furthering their entry. Do not go and open that gate and let them all in if you don't have the resources. If your Sallyport, where your process has got 200 people in there and you only have one bus available, why are you grabbing these people? And we kind of did the same thing in Yuma. And I would regularly have our special response team train. I wanted flashbangs. I wanted smoke. I wanted barking dogs. I wanted the Bearcats rolling in there. I wanted to let people know that you may try to use this immigration crisis as cover to come in here, but we're ready and we're watching for you. And absolutely, we were prepared if we ever had that type of incursion. Because we did have those in Yuma where we'd have 50 people at a time start rocking in, the agents, and they would go up and over the wall and try to run into the neighborhoods. And so the whole idea was to kind of shut that down. The problem is always happened, when you'd have a group of 500 come in, deter our resources and deflect. And so it was very difficult. But the other piece to that, which is I think the most critical piece, is we have rules of engagement. We have the Constitution and the rule of law here on our side. So just because somebody was walking in didn't mean we could, physically assault them or shoot them or use less lethal. But if the totality of circumstances were, like you've seen that video of what they did in El Paso with the National Guard there, shit wasn't going to happen if Border Patrol would have been. That was National Guard. I'm not saying anything bad about the National Guard there, but that scenario should have never happened. That would have been a great example where, at the very least, pepper spray, tear gas, rubber bullets, something to say you can't come into the United States like this. Yeah. And there may have been situations right there. I wasn't there. I'm only looking at the video where if somebody put their hand on me, it may have gone right to deadly force. The problem is the political correctness and the political piece that is associated with border security because they make it about immigration. It would have been poor Haitian migrant murdered by Border Patrol. And no agent wants, and knowing that the president at the time, which was Biden, would not have had their back, it makes them have to go from, I got to think this out now. I can't be reactionary and train. Threat popped up in front of you when you were in theater, there was no questions asked. Right. Threat pops up in us, it's like, unfortunately, they've been demonized so bad, they're thinking through this like, well, do I need to wait for it to the bullet comes at me before I return fire? That was always the concern for me, is that the politics and the media had made it so difficult for our agents to do some of their jobs. And that was one of the hard things. But I agree, when we look at, if we had intel that said there's somebody that's coming through here and they're going to use this as a cover, every chief has a plan for that. I mean, I kind of danced around it, but at the end of the day, I think kind of cutting through that, if there was a threat, and like I always told our agents, you do what you've been trained to do with the facts presented in front of you, and I got your back. And that would have been no exception.
I mean, to me, there's an irony in that the rules of engagement overseas, where you're thousands of miles from home, are more relaxed than they are here in your own house. And I get that. It's not black and white where you can just say, in this case we would do this, because there are so many other factors and contexts that are going to get taken into account as to what you do, how you do it, where you draw that line or whatever. And it's one of those scenarios where it's like there's no good answer.
Yeah.
And I get that, and I get that that's even a tough question to answer. But, throwing the kind of, we'll say, worst case scenario hypothetical your way. Like, let's say Trump calls you tomorrow and says, hey, I want you to run the Border Patrol. And obviously no, multi-thousand population numbers of groups of people getting ready to cross the border are going to be able to do that without us knowing that. But let's, again, just throw in kind of the worst case hypothetical. Let's say that every sector has tens or even hundreds of thousands of people migrating and forming on the Mexican side of the border. Let's say there's 500,000 people scattered, in huge mobs getting ready to come across, and to overwhelm the system, they all are in cahoots and decide, hey, at 12:47 on Thursday, we are all coming across at the exact same fucking time.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that's kind of happened, not to that scale, multiple times with those caravans when they come in, right? They show up and then they end up trying to make a big entry.
But none of them did, though.
None of them, never to that extent, right? We were catching a caravan a day anyway.
Yeah.
So we never had this organized. One time in San Diego, you had a big mass cross. We'd had these mass incursions, several hundred at a time, do that, but nothing to that scale. But here's what I would say: if we had any advance notice, it's all hands on deck. It's I'm maximizing every resource I have. Department of Defense, National Guard Bureau, state and locals. We're putting everything there, and agents know our rule of engagement. Our horses, our dogs, everything is out there, and we're gonna do everything we can to stop it. I want to see that show of force, because that's the first thing in any kind of scale when it comes down to law enforcement is officer presence. Yeah. And that's why I would do these repeated quarterly drills with our mobile response team and special response team to make sure that they were exercising and practicing so they knew how to handle this. And I would absolutely put everything I had, all hands on deck. Unless if you had a badge and a gun and you were physically able to do your job, you're out there ready to do this, right? Because the American people expect that from us. They were Border Patrol. We're not necessarily a national security agency, but that our job is to protect our nation's borders, and we're the first line of defense for this country. So if we had that information, 100% everything would be out there. And to the extent, again, none of that magnitude, we did do that. We knew, we have sources, we have human intelligence, we have all that stuff. And when we had an idea that something was going to happen, and sometimes it's just agent intuition, something doesn't seem right, there's a weird feeling tonight, let's get out there and do that, right? And I think the American people would expect nothing less. And I guarantee you right now, under President Trump and the leadership of the Department of Justice, we've got Secretary Hegseth on board with DOD out there creating national defense areas, all these things. Yeah. They're going to do what they need to do. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. To me, again, I know that that's like the worst question to try to answer.
It's hypothetical, so but it's not too far. Well, look, is it any different than what happened in L.A. over the last 10 days with the riots? I mean, it's the same thing.
Not really. I guess, and I think where it's tricky and where I'm trying to understand, I guess, the government's ultimate position is that the use of force when your life is in danger is pretty cut and dry.
Yeah.
So like I can understand that in cases of rock throwing, assault, et cetera, it's pretty justified, and it's a clear-cut rule of engagement. To me, my biggest kind of question is there a volume? Like, let's say that there's no violence, there's no rock throwing, there's no assault. It's just so many people streaming at the same time. In that shit or get off the pot moment, do you guys say, I guess we're being overrun and we're not going to engage, or dude, we can't let this happen, and even though they're not being violent, we have to physically prevent them, and if we're so overwhelmed number-wise, if that means engaging using lethal force, then we're going to do that. Like, would that decision ever be made, do you think?
I don't believe the decision to use lethal force would be made other than in a case-by-case. An individual has to make that decision. But the preemptive striking, if you will, with less lethal, from our rubber bullets, if you will, and gas. I think that's a no-brainer from a volume perspective. But I think the largest group I ever single-handedly apprehended was 132 people in a canyon outside of Portal, Arizona, right there on the New Mexico-Arizona state line. And the pucker factor was there. Yeah. And in my best Spanish, I was like, I didn't tell them how many rounds I had, but I was carrying I had 15 on me, and then 12 and 12, 39, 40 rounds on me. Yeah. Who wants to be first? Yeah. And I found a couple people that looked like they may be a little froggy, and put them, made an example of them. Didn't physically injure them, but they were the ones that got cuffed. Yeah. And it was an hour before I even got radio contact with my backup to start bringing the vans in. That's, I guess, and it was a different demographic back then. There was a few guys in that group that ended up being pretty, had lengthy criminal histories, but they also knew this border patrol is not. He's by himself. He's not going to waste much time thinking about not shooting us. So who wants to be first, right? And but in that scenario, you have. I would tell you that most chiefs, most station commanders, would say, from a volume issue, that the less lethal would be a no-brainer. The deadly force, because we are, as much as it is a national security issue, and we do have military on our border, no one in Congress is looking at this as we're just going to start shooting, I think that's just the reality of it. Yeah. And it would be probably a very difficult decision to be made, because I don't think that people in Congress would back it up. Even some of the Republicans would probably like, you just started shooting people, because they don't get it. Yeah. They don't get it because they've never. If they were down there in that situation, they'd be peeing down their leg. Most of them. There's some good guys in there. That, some tough guys in there that I would rather them be out there working with me than up there in Congress. Yeah. But I think the majority of people who've never experienced this kind of volume of people, or ever been in a situation where you have to make a life or death decision and live with it. Yeah. I don't know if they would back your play, but I would tell you that the less lethal would be a no-brainer, and I would 100% support that, especially from a volume perspective.
Yeah, and I get. I mean, there's probably people that would say that's a ridiculous question to even ask, just for the simple fact that for that amount of people to set the stage for something like that to happen would take so long and be such a footprint that we would be able to, put pressure on the Mexican government to say, hey, I see what's happening. If you guys don't fix it, there's going to be hell to pay. And it
how many operations did you go into that you have to murder board this? You have to plan this. That's part of our job, because we all know once the first shots, it all changes, right? Yeah. I'll laugh. It's similar, different context. But I go back to my El Paso days. We were having, we were having a lot of problems with the Democrat oversight. They wanted to come over, and we'd seen it kind of ramp up, and you're almost like what you've seen happen in New Jersey recently. I asked our attorney, what charge could I put on Congress if they violate our rules while they're here? I get it, but there are 3 separate but equal branches of government. They aren't supposed to record. They are not supposed to, engage. They're not supposed to touch our agents. And they're like, ha, ha, ha. Why would that even happen? I'm like, I didn't ask for your opinion. I asked, what is the charge and they's like, well, it would be this, and whatever the charge was. Yeah. And sure enough, that was one of the incidents where Ocasio-Cortez got upset because the agent took a picture. That was the infamous drinking from the toilet comment she made. But a couple of members of Congress were literally grabbed an agent and said, what are they doing? Yeah. And they really started impeding our business. And unfortunately, I guess in my sense, I was like, why didn't you should have cuffed them up, And I was laughing because our chief counsel was like, oh, that will never happen. Yeah. No, it will happen. And we're seeing them do, that's what just, now that one congresswoman in New Jersey is, got charged, right?
Yeah, as she should.
As she should. And that's the reality. And again, people, it goes back to, is it a dumb question? No, it's not a dumb question, because it's our instinct that knows this is possibly going to happen. Now, we did everything we could to make sure that it's de-escalated, or the environment is not going to be conducive to, this to occur. But it happened anyway, because you're dealing with some crazy people. And then again, back to the security piece, we don't, and that's the other thing. This is where I'm starting to lean more like maybe we should do a little bit more. most, and I can't speak from in a definitive way, but I would venture to say most FBI, DEA, U.S. Marshals, when they're going after somebody, and I would probably say all of it now, they know who their subject is, who the fugitive is, what's their criminal history, what's their propensity for violence, are they going to be a cop killer, what is. So when they go in there, they're armed, ready to go. And if they say hands up and that guy reaches like this, they're probably taking him out.
Yeah.
We don't know who we have in custody until we take those fingerprints, and even that could be a lie.
Yeah.
So we don't know who is running into the country. We don't know who that person is that is, potentially putting their hands on an agent. So that goes back to that whole volume thing. You got 200 people storming and there's only 5 agents there. It could be a situation where you don't know who's in that mix, who is in that clutter.
Yeah.
And, again, that agent's going to have to make that decision, but I would back their play if they could articulate that and say, look, we were outnumbered, 50-1 and they were, coming at us and, this guy went for my gun. Yeah, absolutely take him out.
Yeah.
Don't, what does it say? Rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6. In that situation,
Yeah.
you're going to protect the American public and protect yourself so you can go home to your family at night. But
Yeah.
it's you wouldn't want to pre-authorize. I think
Right.
that would be the big hard thing to do.
Yeah. Well, to me, again, I find myself looking at it with a kind of a weird sense of irony or misunderstanding. I'm just baffled that when it comes to this specific act of law enforcement, which
Yeah.
is exactly what it is,
Yeah.
it's way off in left field compared to every other aspect of what's expected, what's allowed, what's considered, right
Yeah.
morally within our society. There's so many other things that if it's taking place in a neighborhood or, 500 yards from an elementary school and a police officer is engaged with somebody doing the exact same thing, there's an expectation and a level of acceptance that just seems way higher than it does for Border Patrol agents dealing with people coming across the border. And to me, what further doubles down on that kind of ridiculous irony is that you have way less of an idea of what you're dealing with, which, in my opinion, should give you even more latitude as to how to conduct it and more flexibility.
Well, I think it comes back to almost full circle to some of our conversation is that ideology. That people have equated the border to immigration, and immigration is immigrants, and it's a victimless crime. They're not seeing this as a public safety. The threat by the school is a public safety thing, and everybody is freaking out about it. But when you have half the country that sees the border as, oh, it's just immigration, they're just trying to get a better life. Well, I'm trying to maintain my life here. I'm not going to let somebody come in and harm me or harm my family. I think that is the big problem when it comes to the border, because you and I are seeing it as this is a potential threat. But there's a lot of lawmakers on both sides. Obviously, the left definitely sees it as a victimless. They have a right to come in here, and there are some moderates that don't see the problem like others do. That's why I repeatedly, and will say it ad nauseum, it is about national security and public safety. It's not about immigration. That's just one piece of that puzzle. Yeah. But when you make it about immigration, it just, again, it naturally brings down that level. Well, they're just trying to come get to work here. Their job may be to be part of a sex trafficking or child trafficking or weapons trafficking work, not just somebody that's going to go do some unskilled labor. If that was just the case, then you could almost understand where people are seeing that. But we know.
Well, that or you don't know, and that's the problem.
Well, yeah.
And I think that is a great point, and agree with you that the most important one. So, to me, like doing this with the actual policy at the border, seems to be a bit of a hamster wheel politically.
Yeah.
As somebody who's spent, a lifetime, dealing with every echelon within CBP, what do you think the best way, or how do you think the best way to educate the public who is naive to that, and kind of the simplest way to segregate the fact that there's a huge, that immigration and border security aren't mutually exclusive that way, or they are, or however that saying works.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it, and just what I just said. In fact, whenever I do public speaking events, it's really, that's my opening line, is that border security is national security, it's public safety, it's agro security, it's all this stuff. It's about keeping America safe. That immigration and border security are related, but they're not mutually exclusive. You can have a secure border and a common sense, compassionate, easier immigration system, but they all have to come in. The actual line I use is tall fences and wide gates. And that's actually from the late Senator Fred Thompson from Tennessee. Back in a 2008 GOP primary, they were bringing up border security then. What was, I can't do the math, 18 years ago, 19 years, 17 years ago. Asked him about that. He said, something to the effect that we should be a country of tall fences and wide gates. And I listened to that. I was like, he's absolutely right. And the tall fences represents the entire border security apparatus. The wall, the roads, the sensors, the cameras, the agents, the policy. The wide gates is our ability to control and contain what is in America's best interest for strong economy, commerce, trade, travel, and lawful immigration. Yeah. And by using the gate analogy or metaphor, you can open it when things are good. Or, depending on how you look at it, if you can't find workers, you do a little bit wider gate. But you know what? When things we've got a national security threat, we've got a problem, we can close that gate.
Right.
We just want people to come in and knock on the front door and be invited in, not sneak through the back fence or sneak through the window and then go chase them out later. And so, to me, when we tell people, look, that is common sense. Secure your border. Yeah. And the same people that will argue that live in gated neighborhoods. They have a lock on their door. They probably have a lock on their bathroom in their master bedroom. Yeah. But will complain because we want to put a gate and a lock on our front door of our country. And to me, that's how I try to explain it. It's like, make this about national security and public safety, because that's what it is.
Yeah. I agree. I couldn't agree more. I think, for whatever reason, even that concept seems to get lost on a lot of people. And even when you break it down, like, you live in a house, do you want people just walking in that you don't know who they are and taking your stuff? Like, no. For whatever reason, it still gets lost. There's another side of that coin that I really never hear, whether it's in the media or politically or whatever, that I fail to understand why that's the case. For the proponents of, borderless countries or whatever, is that, I would just ask one simple question, is there a number, that you would say no more than X? Doesn't matter what the number is. I'm just curious if any of those people have actually thought of that. Is there a number at which you would say we can take X number of people, we can't take more than that? I don't think there is.
No, they've never. I mean, the only time they ever throw numbers out there is when they do quotas for refugees or how many visas they're going to give out. But to your point, at some point, this is where you bring in the great Hank Johnson from Georgia and say, we're going to tip. Yeah. we may tip Guam if we keep bringing in people. Yeah. The same thing, right? Like there is an economic.
So stupid.
Yeah, that guy was stupid, right? I mean, it made him famous, I guess, but not in the right way. But here's the thing. And we have smartphones, but they're not that smart, because I can't put a number to, when you put if you put dollars and cents to what 20 million illegal aliens do. And that's what the president's doing now, and looks at these Medicaid things their taxpayer money's going to illegal aliens. If you can make this a math problem and assign it to taxpayer money, I guarantee you people would come up with a quota of how many we can allow in and what that immigration number should be. If some of the people, lobby firms saying we can't pay you any more money because we've hit a certain scale, they would figure out a way to solve it. Yeah. And it's the same thing when it comes to immigration. We've got to be able to put a number to it. Look, and this means a lot to me, but so I don't want it to be cliche. But we have homeless veterans. We have homeless children. We've got hungry veterans. We have hungry children in this country. And we can't even solve that yet. Yeah. But we're going to bring in and think 10 million people coming in illegally is okay. and let's put them on the government dime until such time and give them their fucking due process? What's the due process to that veteran who is now having a hard time and he can't pay his bill and is homeless? Yeah. What's the due process for this child whose mom or dad have a problem and now they can't feed their child? Charity starts at home.
I agree.
I think that's the only way we're going to fix this and hopefully get some people on the left to come at least somewhere towards the center is like, why aren't we taking care of our own people? Yeah. Why aren't we take care of the victims of this system versus creating more victims of the system?
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think, make sure your own house is in order before you let other people in addition to it. I mean, to me, it makes me think of, America is like a ship in turbulent waters, and there's a bunch of people trying to get on it, and it's like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't help people. I'm 100% for helping people that you can. I do think we should prioritize everyone here that's a U.S. citizen first. But even with that, it's like there is a point, and I don't care how big the ship is or how much by way of resources you have on said ship, there is a tipping point at which if you allow one more person on, it's going to sink the ship. Yeah. And how that is so lost on so many people in this country is beyond me. I don't get how they don't at least grasp that very simple concept.
Well, I love the ship analogy because anybody can take the helm when the waters are calm, right? Yeah. And so thank goodness we've got somebody that knows how to take the helm when it's turbulent, like the president right now. Yeah. But your example or your analogy is no different than people in our own lives. There's only so much, we can spend every month. There's only, and my wife will laugh, but there's only so many concert T-shirts I have room for, right? Like,
can verify.
Yeah. I mean, there's only so much, right? So we're okay to do that in our own lives. Yeah. But then we think it's okay for the government just to go ahead and do it. Like, I mean, I laugh because our government is like a credit card consolidation loan. Yeah. All they do is, oh, good, now I paid off my credit cards. I still have $50,000 loan, and then I run my credit cards back up. Yeah. And that's what we're doing with our budget, with our deficit. That's what we're doing with our immigration. We're not cleaning anything up. Yeah. And I mean, I'm just as guilty as the next guy. Like, well, just charge it, But I eventually I'm gonna pay that off. Yeah. We don't ever pay it off here for the country. In fact, we just create more debt by bringing in more people. And the last thing I'll say on that, when it comes down to clean up your own house and charity starts at home, it's just like any small business or any business owner. If you've had a great year, and it comes down to a Christmas bonus, you're going to give a little bit. I see that. I'll tip a little bit higher because it's been a good year. We made a little bit more money this year. But you know what? If we've actually lost money, and I've had to really crank down on everything, I'm not going to be as generous because I got to take care of my family. Yeah. And our country has got to look at that. And I think that's what the administration is doing with a lot of these programs that they're cutting. It's because they want taxpayer money to go to taxpayers. Yeah. And they want to prioritize tax-paying U.S. citizens, not non-citizens. Because not every non-citizen, if I'm saying this right, not every non-citizen is not contributing. There's a difference between an illegal alien and a non-citizen. Somebody's here lawfully here as a resident, lawfully here on a visa. Yes, they are paying their taxes, and that's okay, and that's good because and they are qualified for limited benefits. But when you're here illegally, you're not qualified for anything. Yeah. And when you got, again, we could spend the entire time talking about problems domestically, and yet we've got a group of people that think that this is okay to just bring in more problems. Yeah. And the government's going to fix it. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, and it's totally unrelated, and we won't get into it, but I feel the same way largely about most of our foreign policy. Yeah. Again, that's an episode by itself.
Yeah, but it has something to do with what national security and border security. Keep it on the other side of the ocean. Yeah. Otherwise, it's coming here. And how much money are we spending? I mean, look. I don't have the facts in front of me, but we can connect some dots based on like USAID and all those things that we've done. State Department, we know, spends bukus of dollars. We know Defense does the same thing. But it's encouraging some of the countries to continue this flow into our country. I mean, that's the problem is spend the money. I'm okay if you want to send Guatemala some money, but nobody passes through Guatemala coming to the United States.
Yeah.
You know, and then that
They
should be the
getting something for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing we haven't talked about yet is the China factor. Is that there's been blips throughout the last half decade or so where there's been significant populations of if you want to call them fighting age males. I mean, young men in the prime of their life coming across the border in to me alarmingly high numbers that are Chinese nationals. At your time within the entire scope of your career, but more specifically towards the later third of it, what has been your experience and what are your thoughts on that kind of individually?
I can tell you that it wasn't probably until 2020 did China even become a blip on the radar when it comes to those that were entering the country illegally. I think I heard stories of a group of Chinese being caught in the boot heel like in 1994, the year before I got out there, Boot Heel, New Mexico. We didn't catch illegal aliens from China, at least in the areas I were. I'm sure it was happening, but they were not a demographic because it takes a lot to leave China. Yeah. But then you go back to just the last few years, and I'm gonna make sure I got my math right, but I think we're talking just double digits in 2018, 19, and 20, maybe 100 across the board. But then in the last 2 years under President Biden, the number exceeded 50,000 Chinese nationals entered illegally into the United States in the southwest border, with the majority of them being in Arizona and mostly in California. And we know that China is a huge adversary and geopolitical foe of ours. And we also know that, again, it takes a lot to be allowed to leave China. Coercion and espionage, if 1% of that 50,000 are subject to coercion to conduct espionage or threats against this country, that's a lot of people. That's a problem. So this goes back to, this isn't about immigration. This is a national security issue. I mean, and I may be wrong, but was it the Obama-Romney debate when Romney brought up Russia and Obama laughed because he was bringing up China as the geopolitical threat?
Yeah.
But how we forget that, but yet we're okay with catching and releasing 50,000 Chinese nationals. And Mayorkas, when he was still secretary, I think they've had one, maybe two flights of 50 to China, and they were like, this is a huge success and win for us. So out of 50,000 people, you flew 100 back to China?
Yeah.
And we, again, have no idea. None of us in the Border Patrol spoke the many dialects of Chinese dialect. And we were relying on interpreters to give us the information to do the basic processing. Now, I will say to some extent, even under the latter part of Biden, because he was now running for re-election at the time and needed to do something because his numbers were completely underwater, FBI was showing a little interest. Now, again, things have changed significantly under Trump that, we're not seeing that demographic coming across illegally. And if it is, it's small numbers because you're literally the average. We had a couple, like I mentioned, low numbers under 100 the last week or so, but the average is around 250 a day across the entire southern border. And we're just not seeing that demographic come across. I have been down there while I was working, but even in the last 2 years since I retired from the Border Patrol and been down there on the border, seeing the hundreds of people, to include dozens upon dozens of Chinese nationals in that age range of 18 to 35. Those are military-aged men. And you know this, men don't leave their countries and go to another country unless they're planning for war. There's a problem there, right? There's a problem there.
Yeah, I mean, the only exception I think you could reasonably make is say, Mexico, if there's a 25-year-old guy coming here to support his family back home, but I don't think that that's realistic to expect that happening from China.
Well, it wasn't like I was seeing, when I was physically down there, seeing a family of four, and there was mom and dad and two kids.
Yeah.
It was four men, 25 years old. It's...
Well, and even with that, how do you know that that's the real mom and that's their kids? I mean, there's been countless examples of that not being the case.
100%. That happens in every demographic and nationality. That was the game they were playing.
Were there any consistencies or parallels, generally speaking, with the six-figure figures of Chinese nationals coming across that were 18 to 35-year-old men that you saw or that you're aware of?
And what do you
like in any way, like they all had something about them that was the same.
All pretty much going to the same locations in California.
Really?
That's where they were heading to.
Did they say why?
I think that's just where there's still a population of Chinese in Mexico, like there are around the world. I think that there was just some connections with certain NGOs, non-government organizations in Mexico that were facilitating that were pushing that. I think every one of these immigration advocate NGOs, I mean, there are some good people there that just are good humans, but there's also people that just are, think that this is open border and is great, and they don't realize what they're contributing to, and I think we should be looking into every one of them. But there was not a single threat piece that was common other than age. And again, why are these four guys traveling together, all about the same age, going to the same address, right?
Yeah. And relatively healthy too, right? In good shape, clean cut, something stuck out. I mean, I remember seeing that as a pretty regular and consistent thing, that they all, they looked almost military.
Well, if they weren't from Central America or Mexico, I mean, this is no bullshit. These people were well taken care of. They've been on planes. They weren't caravanning through the desert and going through the jungles. And these people were flying from, typically, even some of the South Americans, now, they would come in and go through the gap and migrate north. But the majority of the people from around the world that were coming into places like Yuma, they're flying into Mexico, through Mexico City or Cancun on some kind of tourist visa, getting an author. This is another thing that Mexico had a problem. I had a problem with Mexico. Give them like a 40-day tourist visa, and then they were taking planes from Cancun or Mexico City to the big tourist destination of Mexicali, Baja California, because that's where everybody wants to go. Yeah. And then they were crossing the border in Yuma, getting on a vehicle or something and showing up 40 miles later and coming. I kid you not, some of the ladies looked like they were ready to go to the club. Crossing holding their high heels because they didn't want to walk in this desert. Nice clothes because they'd been in on a plane. The worst thing they did is maybe didn't sleep, very well. Gucci bags. They were bringing so much luggage. These were not people that were desperately traversing through horrible situations. They were flying on airplanes for 16 hours and then crossing the border. And the biggest inconvenience for them was it took them 3 to 5 days to get processed and released.
Were they claiming asylum also?
A lot of times they didn't claim asylum in Border Patrol custody. It was after they were processed, and then they would go to ICE, and then they claim asylum there. Really what would happen is everybody that we catch, we'd have to do a credible fear screening, and we did have a bunch that just would say asylum, but then you'd have a lot of them that would say, I guess let me kind of backtrack that. In a nutshell, they were claiming asylum. They just weren't saying it as soon as you called them asylum. That's kind of a wives' tale that's happening, right? The reality is this, is everybody that gets processed, we ask them a series of questions about credible fear of returning to their country. And nearly all of them, almost to 100%, would answer in the affirmative. They claim fear of going back, which immediately kicked them into an asylum claim.
Yeah.
It didn't do anything for agents because all it was 5 extra questions, and then we put claimed fear. And then ICE would end up releasing them, and then they, in the best case scenario, they would get an asylum review within 30 days. But now that they're being released and their hearings are sometimes 5, 6, 7 years, all they would do is claim asylum. But here's the other piece. and people will cherry pick laws and policies, right? It's still illegal to enter the country between a port of entry, regardless of your intent. That's the piece that a lot of the far left and a lot of the immigration advocates get on, is like, anybody can claim asylum. Okay, yeah, but when it's written for, like, if you are, regardless of your status, that's what they like to get on. Well, regardless of their status. Well, a lot of that was intended for, like, if you came here on a visa and you're from the Ukraine, and while you're here as a student and your visa is about to expire and you realize there's a war broken out and your town doesn't exist anymore, I'm going to claim asylum. Well, your visa's expired, so now you're here illegally. So regardless of your status, you can claim asylum. It wasn't intended for you to illegally enter the United States by droves, and then when it was time to go be deported, like, oh, no, I don't want to go back. I want to claim asylum. That's how the system got abused. That was intentional to overwhelm it. And to take 7 years to get a hearing is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, to me that seems, and again, excuse my ignorance to it, but it seems like a simple fix of just stipulate that, any status can claim asylum if you're on an expired visa or you come through a port of entry.
Yeah.
Like, why not just make the language?
Well, remember, asylum, if you're truly seeking asylum, you're supposed to do it in the first country of asylum country. Yeah. So when you travel from India and you go to Germany and then you go to the United Kingdom and then to Mexico, you've hit 3 other countries that would accept asylum.
Yeah.
But you only asked it once you traversed and came in and got caught by the Border Patrol.
Yeah.
That's where the system, so you're really not claiming asylum. And while it's pitiful, and while I'm sorry you're in a bad relationship, while I'm sorry that you have gangs in your neighborhood, while I'm sorry you got shot at when you were walking through town at midnight, that'll happen to you in downtown Dallas, downtown Houston, Chicago. Yeah. That my boyfriend's abusive, as we'd hear from the women a lot. And they're like, well, sorry, but that happens here in the United States too. That's not asylum. Are you being persecuted for your political beliefs because of your religion? And it's like our EEO laws. Basically, if you're being
race, right?
race, creed, religion, and political affiliation. Living in a bad neighborhood and having a bad relationship or can't find a job is not asylum.
Yeah.
And it's a tough life, but you know what? We've all had to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like even the extra 5 questionnaire thing is more of a loaded question that's like channeling them into claiming asylum.
It is. It was done under the, I think it was MAC 98 or IRIRA law in 96 when we got the authority for expedited removals. In other words, Border Patrol agents could make the decision to remove them. The only catch in that was we had to ask them if they had fear, because and I don't disagree with it necessarily, is we were basically taking the power of the immigration judge and giving it to law enforcement to say, you met these requirements, you entered the country illegally within the last 14 days, and the last thing I'm going to ask is, because what they didn't want is us just sending everybody back like we talked about. What if someone had a legitimate fear claim and we put them on a plane and put them right back in that situation? Unfortunately, just like every law on our books and every HR rule in an organization, it's done with good intentions, but it's abused. So immediately, like you said, it becomes a loaded question. Oh, so I don't have to go back if I say I have fear, and it may be months or years before I have to even consider going back? Great. Oh, and by the way, I'll have an anchor baby or two. Yeah. And then I show up at a hearing 5 years from now and say, yeah, I came here from Guatemala. It was really tough. I was scared in my neighborhood. But now I've got 2 U.S. citizen babies who only know this country, and one of them is going into preschool next year.
Yeah.
And that's where the current issue with birthright citizenship and all that stuff comes in. But that's where the system is being abused, and it overwhelms those that are legitimately trying to do the right thing. It creates the chaos at the border that makes our country vulnerable. And again, if it was easy, they would have fixed it. It's human beings, and it's this government that makes it complicated. And complicated and complex is easy if you execute. The problem is I should say it easy, but it's doable if you just execute and you try to find solutions. And I think I don't have this as fact, but just reading the tea leaves and being part of the first 100 days of Trump 47, he wants to find a solution to the immigration problem because he knows he can solve the security problem. And I think that's going to be the next phase is, hey, we're doing the interior enforcement. We've secured the border, to the extent we can, and we're continuing to do that. We're doing the interior enforcement. We're fixing everything I mentioned regarding, immigration enforcement. Now we need to fix the immigration system. I think that's going to be the next phase of this administration once they lock down the rest of what they're doing now.
Yeah. So on that same note, if Trump called you tomorrow and said, hey, I want you leading the charge, it seems like the border is between what's already taken place and if this bill gets passed, the funding to kind of complete the full circle or cycle of what's needed. Is there anything else that you would do to fix the border problem?
I don't want to take anything away from the current chief, but it's the easiest chief job you got right now. Seriously, you've got the entire weight of the administration, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense. Everybody is focused on the same problem, right? So I don't know, just other than executing what we have planned, I'm not aware of anything from a tangible, practical security matter. There's not anything else I think we would need to do other than just execute the plans that we have, which is finish building the wall where it makes sense, installing the technology, ensuring the access roads so our agents can get there, and continue with the consequences for those that enter the country illegally. We ended catch and release. That day, a week or so ago, we had 93. Mm-hmm. Not a single one of them were released to the community or released. They were detained or prosecuted.
Yeah.
So, that's a huge thing. So that's what I would say is now is the time to shore everything up and continue down that path. I cannot think of anything, at least right now, off the top of my head, that I would do differently besides maybe start working on the northern border, because that's still a threat. Right. But if it was, Chris, you need to be down here, what do we got to do at the southern border? I was like, continue to execute 100% what we have planned. Northern border, again, it's a little bit tricky because the environment up there is different. And Canada is different. The threat picture coming from Canada and in Canada is different. I don't think we need a 3,000-mile wall across Canada, but we do need wall in areas, right? That's where technology and more manpower. We probably need to double the size of the Border Patrol agents on the northern border to get to places. But that's a whole other conversation there.
Yeah. I am curious, watching the last few months of internal domestic ICE agents and groups or operational entities, have really started to ramp up, finding, apprehending and prosecuting or deporting people that are on lists or criminal elements. Yep. There's obviously been some pushback on the left of saying that some of these people weren't on the list or weren't supposed to be there. Their only crime, air quotes, was coming here illegally, but they were with an affiliated gang member or something, and so they got sent to El Salvador or whatever. I'm curious, can you kind of synopsize, what the media is getting wrong, or if there are huge gaps in what's being put out there, and also, do you agree with it? Would you do it any different? Would you add or subtract anything to what's currently going on as we speak?
I love the question because it was a conversation I had with Tom Holman when during the campaign, was talking about the immigration, targeted enforcement operations and the big roundups, right? That was a big talking point. It's like we need to make sure we're very specific on this because it creates a level of, we're not worried about people being scared because if you've done no wrong, you got nothing to worry about. But the key was targeting criminals and national security and public safety threats. And that's what ICE is doing right now, okay? Everybody that they're going after, every targeted operation begins with someone that is a national security or public safety or a criminal. The difference between this administration and the last one is this administration is not telling agents to ignore violations of the law that are committed in front of them. So in other words, Biden would have said, if that guy isn't on your list, you need to let him go. Trump's saying, if that guy has violated immigration law, you can arrest him. And that's the difference. And that's what the media is twisting, is the agents are going out there. And you know what? I do have a question. I have a question if I'm going after MS-13 and I knock on a door at an apartment complex to go arrest this gangbanger who is here illegally, an MS-13 member, or Trinidad or whatever it is, and I got 2 other guys hanging out with him that just aren't on the list or don't have a criminal record, but you're still hanging out with these notorious bad people. You need to go. You know, I don't feel sorry for anybody that has violated our law, that has been here for, look, if you came in under Bush, Obama, and Biden, and even Trump 45, and you've been living here illegally and you've done nothing but that initial illegal entry, and you haven't taken steps to do the right thing, nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, but a good chunk of people under the Trump 45 and definitely under Obama and Biden, and even the second term of Bush, if you would have come in and said, all I've done is come here illegally, I'm working, I've got family here, they weren't probably going to be deported. In fact, they would have more than likely gotten an opportunity to get a visa and come over here and begin the process. And I don't think many people in the country, including myself, would have that concern if you tried to right your wrong. But now you got the dreamers. So now you got a 35-year-old dreamer that's complaining about being deported. You're 35 years old. You've been an adult here for 17 years, and you've been here since you were 5, and you haven't done anything to try. So I don't really have that much sympathy for them. Do I want us going around and using our resources to go raid, agricultural fields without any true targeted objective? Not really. But I also say that if I go after the one guy that I know is working in that field and 20 others run from me, I'm not going to turn a blind eye. And I think that's the problem, is people just expect agents to uphold the law and say, well, but give them that discretion. Now, we may not prosecute that one guy that we caught. We may offer him a voluntary return back to their country, a free flight back to wherever. But we're not going to just turn around and say, oh, okay, well, you weren't on our list, you can go. I think that's where they get it wrong, is this administration is not going to tell our agents or ask our agents to look the other way for people that violate the law.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, it's baffling that so many people, I mean, I don't know what the figures are, but it sure seems like a lot of people take issue with that.
Yeah.
I
laugh. Can you imagine if what would happen if 100 people just ran the front of the line of a Taylor Swift concert and demanded to be in the front row?
Yeah.
They would be perp walked out. They'd be on the front of the paper.
Mob drugged through the street.
Exactly, right? But it's okay to jump in front, jump in front of the line when you're coming here illegally with zero repercussions, and people will protest for you. Yeah. But try to do that at a sporting event or a popular contest or concert, and you likely get, like you said, mob rules would be okay.
Yeah, so speaking of ICE, I mean, can you say, and I want to be, I guess, sensitive to the operational nature of what they currently have going on, but how many ICE agents there are that are out doing that kind of thing?
I think ICE, when you look at the actual, ICE has got Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and they have the Homeland Security Investigations, which is basically the investigators, and they also have ICE Enforcement Removal Operations. Those are the ones that handle detention and removal. So combined, there's probably about 15,000 total for all of that. It's actually probably a lot less, to be honest with you. There's probably only about 5,000 investigators, and then a little bit more of the ERO folks. So that's a small organization compared to Border Patrol, where there's 19,000 just agents. The other thing too is, and you'll see it in some of the media clips, there's a lot more than just ICE out there doing that. I mean, you've taken, the White House has said no, FBI, DEA, the marshals, everybody's on this because it's public safety and national security. But they are focusing on doing exactly what the administration said. And so this president has said, you know what? We're prioritizing. No one's sitting behind a desk with twiddling their thumbs. You're going to go out there and start targeting. But I'm not giving away any trade secrets. It's public knowledge. But their operations are their operations.
Is there a safe way to kind of synopsize how they find people? Because to me, it would be difficult, to say the least, and quite the undertaking to find people who came here illegally and just were released, but
Yeah.
have, terrorist or gang affiliations to find out where they live? Are they using just standard FBI and normal investigative techniques?
it's just the old saying, garbage in, garbage out, right? So whatever we initially had when they, if they were, a lot of the ones again were targeted, they know who they are, they may have been in the system, they may have been caught and released, and then later on we found out they were bad or whatever. So they're just, it's typical, police work, going off leads. Human intel is obviously critical. While the leadership of a lot of city police organizations and county sheriffs, are sanctuary cities, the boots on the ground still have a job to do, and they're going to work. And again, where there are demographics in of this population. So there's just typical police work and investigative leads. We have basic information. Again, a lot of these people have orders of removal. That's the other thing, back to what the media is getting wrong. They've already had their due process. We call them bag and baggages. They've already been submitted in front of a judge. Whether they showed up or not, the judge ruled deported in absentia. They skipped out on their due process, or they got it and they failed to remove themselves. So we have the last known information, and then investigators go do what investigators do. And they have undercovers, and it's just part of the process.
Can I throw a hypothetical at you just to see if you would make an exception, or if you think that there should be exceptions language-wise built into legislation for ICE policy, which is illegal immigrants that, the sole or only crime is that they came here illegally, but it was, 35, 40 years ago. They have children who are U.S. citizens that join the U.S. military and serve and fight. And now, fast forward, they're, the parents are now in a position where ICE says, hey, you were with this other targeted person, great, your son's joined the Army, but you got to go. Would you make exceptions for cases like that?
Yeah, I think we always have to look at things from a case-by-case situation. Just like we had one, I think that was actually recently was awarded a medal, or at least was in the military, but then never became a naturalized citizen and committed felony crimes and did time. Well, he's deportable, and people are up in arms. Well, he served our country. I agree, but he also committed felonies, and so we have to look at things from a case-by-case situation. I would also say this. There is also a timing for this. Like right now, where we are trying to reduce the clutter, and by clutter, I mean all the ones we know that are here, that have orders of removal, that they have, criminal records. Like we get to that point, then we should be able to look at those case-by-case situations, because I do agree to the extent it's reasonable that, if somebody, all they did was come over here, and then they have U.S. citizen kids that end up serving their country, I think we should look at that exception. But I don't want to make a blanket policy, because every family can tell you they got good sons and bad sons. We don't know what dad did. So I wouldn't want a policy that says if all you did was enter illegally. I want to know more about dad. I want to know more about mom. Are they haven't been caught? Are they facilitating other things, and son didn't want to have anything to do with mom and dad? I mean, again, we've got to really look at it from a case by case. I don't want to broad brush, because I know of plenty of people that think that their parents are really good, but they're in some really bad stuff. So again, the answer would be yes, I'm open for that. But I do want to make sure that we don't ever broad brush. We deep dive and just peel back a layer or two, so we're not we're not giving mom or dad a break when mom and dad maybe didn't deserve the break. Does that make sense? I mean,
no, for sure it does.
Because we got to be careful with this the broad brush.
I mean, if I'm reading into it, and I don't mean this to be a loaded question, but would a concern or a potential concern be if that is now policy, where it's not an exception or a case by case, it's just how it is? Is it now, parents that say, hey, join the fucking military real quick, and then we can fast track it, and then we won't get in trouble? Is that would be taken advantage of?
Remember, just like I said, most policies are done with good intentions.
Road to hell's paved with good intentions, right?
Yeah. So I think, you know, we know that there are people that are infiltrators and corrupt, join the Border Patrol, and they've got cartel ties. Same thing with military, right? So we've got to, again, be smart with this. But I do believe that is an option that needs to be explored, and I would support it as long as we did our due diligence to make sure that we're just not, broad brushing, oh, well, the kid was in the military, so mom and dad automatically get to stay. Mom and dad automatically get to remain here until we maybe fast track them. Maybe there's exceptions there that we could look at, that they don't have to get at the end of the line because their son or daughter served. We'll give them, a fast track so where they can prioritize them. I would be okay with that because at least all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, that we didn't just broad brush somebody, because that at least mitigates potential corruption and taking advantage of the system. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Here fairly recently, you were working with RFK. He tasked you. One of the big things that thankfully has been brought to light with a lot of different media publications or podcasters or just people such as yourself and RFK that have brought it to light, but is the amount of missing children that, like, to me, that stat by itself should be enough for people to say, this is there is a huge problem with our border policy, and you can leave immigration completely out of it because this doesn't have anything to do with it, like your point has been. Can you tell us about that tasking, how it came about, and kind of highlight that problem and speak to it?
Yeah, so I'll start with the tasking and the relationship with Kennedy. It's actually kind of funny, and I love Bobby Kennedy. Great guy. I feel like I get smarter, or I love people that present something that caused me to stop and think and pause. And I've listened to him, and I'm like, I don't agree with you on that, or I've listened to him like, never thought of it that way. But it goes back to when he was running for president. They asked me to come out there and educate him on the border. His campaign called, and I told him, I'm not voting for you, but border security should be apolitical. It is a national security issue, and didn't want Biden to win. So if we could disrupt the Biden campaign, I'm doing it. But I told him, I will help you write your border strategy, because he literally came out there, thought this was just a right-wing extreme. There was no issues. This was just made up. He spent 3 days down there. And the first night he saw 200 people from all over the world show up, and he's like, this is a problem. And how do we solve it? And basically his policy was Trump 2.0. It was, personnel, technology, infrastructure, work with Mexico, find, common sense, compassion. I got to speak a few times. I defended some of his positions where he was getting lit up by the media, the left-wing media, because they didn't want him challenging, Biden. I maintain a good relationship with him, but I told him, I said, even when he went independent, I'm like, well, you're getting warmer, But then when he finally came on Team Trump, I'm like, you're a wise man. I told you were a wise man, because that's what the country needed, right? It was such a broken border. But the whole time I had been friends with Stephen Miller and Tom Homan and all that group. Like, I've known Homan since 2012 or 13 when I was in D.C. So we always stayed in touch, and we talked about what could we do. And he asked if I'd be willing to come back. I said, for the right position, for the right time, I would be willing to do that. And so after the election, we were super excited that we got President Trump back, and he said, "You still interested?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay. Just let me know, but it's got to be the right position and the right time. I don't want a second career." And he called me. Tom Homan called me right after New Year's this year and said, "Would you be willing to come run Office of Refugee Resettlement, help fix that problem with the trafficking of the kids and bust up those policies and make things right?" I said, "Yeah, I can do that." He said, "Maybe 75, 90, 100 days. So I can do it for 100 days, no problem." And he's like, "Well, maybe longer, maybe a different position if you want it." I'm like, "Oh, let's just start with the 100 days. I'll be happy with that." Well, it just so happened at that point we'd heard that President Trump was going to appoint Bobby Kennedy to be the Health and Human Service Secretary. Well, the Office of Refugee Resettlement and handles unaccompanied children sits in Health and Human Services.
Which may surprise people.
Yeah, because honestly, Office of Refugee Resettlement was established under the last year of Jimmy Carter in 1980. And you go back in time, there was you had the boat people from Vietnam. We had a lot of refugees arriving in the United States. You still had the Cuban refugees. You had all. So we needed an organized, system. After 9/11, we created Homeland Security. The Office of Refugee Resettlement and the unaccompanied children at the border were handled by Immigration and Naturalization Service. Well, when that got all busted up and they moved things around, they stuck the Office of Refugee Resettlement back to Health and Human Services. And that's where they sat it, so it would handle all unaccompanied children. And so anytime we caught somebody, whether it was ICE or Border Patrol or the port, if they were unaccompanied, they got placed with ORR. Going to do that, I'm like, absolutely. I didn't want to, again, a lot of things changed. Obviously, my family's with me, but the priority was I got to take care of them. But absolutely, I can go up there for 100 days. And so the fact that it was working for Bobby was a win. And in fact, I called him up and said, "Hey, I'm gonna be there on Monday." And he's like, "Really?" He didn't know, because this is a White House appointment. This wasn't a Kennedy appointment. It just was a win to work for my friend. And I knew I was never shocked, or should I say I wasn't surprised at what I was getting into. There were some individual cases that shocked me. That how on earth did we allow a child to be placed with that kind of sponsor? So now you know how I got there, right? It was a White House, Holman and Miller wanted me up there for an indefinite period of time. We agreed on the 100 days because when you put your life on hold, it's just your calendar that gets on hold. Life continues, so there's just things we needed to prioritize at the family. So 100 days was enough time. Didn't think I'd get as much accomplished in the first 100 days as we did. So there is a report that the Office of Inspector General did from last year that mentioned 300,000 unaccounted for children. We call them missing children, but they were processed, they were placed with a sponsor. We have no idea where they are. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Because they were going to places that kids shouldn't be going. A lot of that was starting to be addressed as I got there, but really it was the policies and practices at ORR that allowed this to happen. Just things that we would never accept in our real lives, that why would we accept this with children? There was, without getting into too much because it's kids and sensitive and there's open investigations, but we weren't requiring, we'd say proof of documentation, like some kind of a driver's license or something. We'd take photocopies. We needed proof of address. We literally placed people that were sending pictures of them with a photoshopped FedEx package, doing like this in front of a house, saying this is where I live. That was in the sponsor applications. We were accepting, the adults, like give the list of the adults in the house or the adult sponsor, but not all the other adults. So we had no idea where we were placing these kids. To cut through the chase, we mirrored the policies going forward when I got there to match our basic domestic foster care system. So in other words, if you are going to sponsor a foster child, you have to provide XYZ. Proof of valid documentation. The I-9s that we do here in the United States. Driver's license, proof of residency, proof of income. Fingerprints for everybody that is 18 and older in the residency. So you don't know, what we don't know. So if you are an 18-year-old or you're a 30-year-old sponsor and you've got 5 people living with you over 18, we want the fingerprints of them to make sure that they're not traffickers or gangbangers or criminals. DNA testing to ensure family ties when they claim that they're a relative. These are just very simple asks, common sense asks for children to make sure children are in the safest, least restrictive environment when they've been brought through this system. And I'm telling you, there are kids that are placed that are months old to 17 years old, so that have, that have no say-so in what goes on. And every child that comes across the border that's unaccompanied, that's a criminal act because these children cannot make independent decisions, especially when they're 12 and younger. Somebody has paid to bring them across, and the system was allowing anybody to come pick them up if they just presented some documentation. We tell the story, and I never want to dehumanize anybody or equate a person to an animal, but my wife and I rescued a pit bull from an animal shelter who was being euthanized. We wanted to give this dog another shot. We had to provide our driver's license, proof of residency, and proof of income to adopt a dog that was about to be euthanized. Yet, and it had to be verified. We had to physically bring it. But the U.S. government was not doing those type of records checks on placing children with sponsors.
Whose call is that?
That
I mean,
was-
like who? Like
That
there's
would,
got-
that would have been started then, would have been started from the top down. But Secretary Becerra, who was the then Health and Human Services, and his chiefs of staff and his agency director were allowing these things to just happen. And, you know, there were situations where the field specialists, the ones that would go like check to see if this is a good place to place a child, would report back saying, no, there are unknown and unreported adults in this house, and the mom has tattoos that are affiliated with known gangs. Yet supervisors back in D.C. overrode that and said, no, everything says that that's their mom. Go ahead and place it with the mom.
Is the only thought process in terms of on what planet that would be acceptable is the sheer volume, and it was just
479,000
Yeah,
unaccompanied children came in the United States under Biden.
Yeah, I mean, so is that their thought process?
Gotta
Is,
be.
Hey, we don't have room for 500,000. If somebody will take them, just send them there and turn a blind eye.
I believe some of the thought process was volume. They were also, and you and I come from, you know, your military background, my law enforcement background. We think differently. Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement is more of a social type worker environment, right? They're
Giving everybody the
yeah,
benefit of the doubt.
altruistic mindset. I'm trying to help everybody out. This is, I do believe that, and I've learned this while I was there, that there's a lot of good people there that just didn't know because the way the system was set up that it was just like box checking. Document uploaded, yes, you know, there wasn't those verification things that were done by very small groups of people that are no longer with us. You know, like, oh, so they kind of knew. But 479,000 people entered, kids under the age of 17 with no relatives, entered the country illegally under the 4 years of President Biden. And so 300,000 of them initially we couldn't connect the dots. I can tell you now, just in the last 6 months now of this administration, at least in the first 100 days, we had dropped that number down to like 86,000, and they've even moved closer to like 50,000 that have been like rescued, accounted for. The system, you know, we realized that they're not placed in the wrong location. We have removed kids from environments and things like that. The other thing that was really shocked me, and like I said, nothing surprised me, but this shocked me. Well, this was March. So I got there in January, so this was March. We found a tranche of 65,000 notices of concerns that were never acted on since August of 2023. Now, a notice of a concern is a call or a report that anybody in the ORR system, the sponsor, the child, somebody that knows the situation, can report a concern. That's hence notice of concern. And some of these ranged from my sponsor took my Game Boy away, the bread I ate was stale, to there's some strange man that comes in every night and touches me inappropriately. There were 65,000 that never got addressed.
Just a manpower issue? Or?
They had one person assigned to that. You can't. There's no government solution that one person can be part of. It's just not the system. So it was like it was designed that we don't want to know. And then again, who's supervising that one person to find out if they're even doing their job? 65,000 opportunities to save a child. Now, the good news is we put a team together. We had Doge people come in there and help us take this system of those notice of concerns and go through them, collate them, do some, there's a lot of, some of those were duplicates and things like that. But we were knocking out 1,000 a week. Oh, excuse me, I think 800 a day is what we averaged. The goal was 1,000 a day to go through this. So I think we're at that part where we've cleared those. We have gotten multiple criminal leads out of that and turned those over to HSI, to FBI, to the U.S. Marshals. We've had several cases that we uncovered. A lot of these cases, we've put a team together to go back and go through all these cases from the Biden administration, and go through with leave no stone unturned to see, did we miss something? And we were placing kids with known criminal people that have convictions for human smuggling, yet we placed a child there. It was unbelievable to me that this was occurring. I wasn't surprised because I knew how the system was, but I was shocked to see that we allowed a 30-year-old claim to be the brother of a 14-year-old girl with clearly a photoshopped identification and fake birth certificate. I looked at it, I was like, who allowed this? This child got placed. She was raped by other adult men in the household, got pregnant. The Biden administration refused to charge that person. Thank goodness the state of Ohio at least arrested him. We represented that case to the feds back in February, and that person has now been charged and indicted federally as well. So when he gets out of his minor charge from the state of Ohio, the feds have got him. We've turned over multiple leads to places in New Jersey and things like that. So we've got the U.S. Attorney now, Alina Habba, who has worked very closely with President Trump, going after all of these perpetrators. And every day we were turning these cases and leads over to ICE. The last administration refused to allow cooperation between Office of Refugee Resettlement and other law enforcement. It's unbelievable. And that one I didn't realize. I did not realize that we were not allowed, the ORR was not allowed to say, hey, this person's not a citizen, we can't place this child. I mean, I didn't surprise me, but I thought, this is the U.S. government. We're supposed to be communicating. Yeah. I mean, I didn't want to be naive about it, but I also thought, there's no way you're going to give this child to this adult that you don't have proper information, or he's here illegally. Yeah. But that goes back to this continuing this cycle here. And I mean, it was heartbreaking because there was opportunities so many times that we could close the gap and save some lives. But I will tell you this, we ended all those practices. We have put interim final rules into the Federal Register that change some of the policies and practices and illegal acts that were put in there. We have ended Health and Human Services and the Office of Refugee Resettlement's complicity in the cycle by putting these checks and balances in place. And my last parting words to the staff was, if you knowingly or willingly are complicit in anything that harms a child, you will administratively be dealt with. And if there's a crime involved, you'll be criminally charged. And we really, what was very transactional the first, couple months I was there, I literally came in there with a sledgehammer and said, we're busting this up. Became transformational. Literally, I got the buy-in pretty quick, where other federal agencies were coming to us to say, how can we help? And I think I can tell you that it was very much a highlight of my career. Was on day 100, President Trump had a cabinet meeting, and Secretary Kennedy said, we have ended the practice of child trafficking and labor trafficking. The U.S. government and Health and Human Services, that is ended. And that was because of what me and the team that I put together had done with the support from the White House, Stephen Miller, Tom Homan, and everybody there. And obviously, Secretary Kennedy. And Bobby basically said, Chris, I trust you to handle this. You let me know what you need from me. And I kept him informed what he needed to know. He's obviously a busy man. But, it just was unbelievable. Again, I'm not a naive person. And again, I wasn't necessarily surprised, but some of the things shocked me that, and just peeling back layers and talking to people that were behind the scenes, they're like, we just didn't know. Yeah. We were never informed. We've learned more about what was happening. I was like, because the news wasn't reporting it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody really knew what was going on until you guys got in there and started shaking trees. I mean, I'm thankful that you did that. And
we still got a lot of more work to do. I mean, I'll tell you this, and there's still people. So many people, when it comes to human trafficking, they don't know they're victims until it's too late. You know, and you've got people that will tell you that the mom and dad came across and they're sending for the kid. And maybe, and again, it's all criminal, it's all illegal, but you're looking at we want to keep the family together, so mom and dad had to do this, they had to pay the smuggler this way to get the child over. The problem is whatever contract they signed, what's really happened is not happening, because sometimes the kid never makes it, the kid gets raped, the kid gets tortured. Some kids never make it because organ harvesting is a real thing that goes on. I mean, these if you don't pay, the service fee changes, and so they take it out on the child or they take it out on mom and dad. So, I mean, these people that are involved in this are not good people. They're evil people, and they're exploiting people the entire time. And that's where these open border and these immigration advocates miss the mark. They need to come in the right way. We need to be smarter as well as a country on our immigration system. But going through the hole in the fence and expecting good things to come out of this is not, there's no way in this story does it end well for somebody or anybody, because that child is being exposed. And these smugglers, now that they got the kid here, then they're going to turn around and charge mom and dad more money. If not, you're going to have to work it off. Or, you know what, we know where your family's from. I mean, that's the problem, right?
Yeah. So what happens to the kids? I mean, what happened to that girl?
So that 14-year-old immediately will be taken back into the appropriate custody. Since she was undocumented, she would be brought back to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. We would make sure that she would be placed with an appropriate sponsor, appropriate setting. We would obviously make sure she has all the medical attention. It's going to be obviously psychological as well. We're going to be dealing with this for a while, but we're not just turn them to the streets, right? They're going to be taken into another facility where they'll be taken care of, special consideration because of the trauma she's endured. So they will not be placed back into the cycle. We'll take them out of that cycle, and then we'll get them into an appropriate setting, because there's really 4 categories of sponsors. There's the parent or legal guardian. There's another adult relative. There is the unrelated adult relative, and then there is a refugee foster care system. So ideally, we would want it to be mom or dad, but in this situation, most of the time, mom and dad are illegally here, and they're part of a criminal network, and it's not always putting the kid. You would think being with their parents is the best thing, but if mom and dad are involved in the criminal enterprise, it's not a good thing. Unrelated adult family member or a related adult family member still kind of be, the acorn doesn't fall from the tree. Is this a good person? The unrelated adult, that comes back to are we vetting them properly? And so that's important. Foster care system, is not always the best in this country. It's one of the things I work with now. But the idea is just make sure that when we rescue that child, they get all the appropriate attention and services they need, and that we don't put them right back where we rescued them from.
Can and or do people volunteer within your organization to be non-related adult volunteers?
I'm sure. I don't know that if people within ORR or HHS were doing that. I think that's kind of a conflict.
No, I mean, like if somebody listening said, "Hey, I want to help," could they come to ORR? And
you can find that through I think the ORR website of how to become a sponsor.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I know we're getting short on time here, and I've tried to streamline the interview a little bit because of that. But we haven't really talked about your career chunk by chunk.
Yeah.
If you could, just for the sake of brevity, kind of chronologically just say, hey, I did this, and then I did this, and I'd love to talk a little bit about your canine stuff.
Yeah. So I started in 1995. I always like to tell this funny story. I was at Sam Houston State University. I had set up an internship with the Texas Alcohol and Beverage Commission for my last 9 hours of credit before I could graduate. And my fraternity brother and I walked into our advisor's office for whatever we were doing, probably dropping off applications, and the grad assistant said, "Hey, Border Patrol's hiring." You know, INS just faxed an application thing. It was in 1995. So we called the 800 number, got into the queue, came up to Dallas, did the test, got asked to come back for an interview. Now I get offered this job, and I'm kind of freaking out because I've got 9 hours left of summer school, or I had this intern set up. I'm like, my mom and dad would kill me if they helped me, get through school. I'm 9 hours short of degree. They offered me the job to be there in like May 1st or something like that. I'm like, oh man, my parents are going to kill me. I'm not even going to be able to finish this semester. So I asked if there's any way they could push me back to a later hiring date, and they said, well, we can push you in July 9th, but that's it. I'm like, great. So I ended up taking 9 hours of, finished that semester, took 9 hours of summer school, literally had 4 days, and then I was on a plane to El Paso. I got assigned Lordsburg, New Mexico station as my first duty station as a GS-5 Border Patrol agent trainee. Flew to El Paso, did my inter on duty, then they flew us back to Glencoe, Georgia. That's the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. That's where I went through the academy, and then started off as a GS-5 agent in Lordsburg. The progression was GS-579, your journeyman there. Lordsburg was, I had more people in my high school in Houston than the entire county down there. My wife, we were dating in college, and we met, and she came out one weekend while I was at the academy, and we were visiting. I said, let's just do this. Let's get married. And so I took this fifth generation Houstonian, and she came out. I went to New Mexico, started working. I flew back home one weekend in December. We got married. I flew her back. We had a little duplex, and happy to say we'll be married 30 years this December.
Oh, wow.
We were a small station. There was just 20 of us. I think I went the first 2 or 3 weeks without even seeing an illegal alien. That's how different things changed. We'll talk about this for a little more in depth, but the first big thing I got to do as a Border Patrol agent was a canine handler. I got to go, we had detection dogs, that's all we had back then. Now we've got dual dogs now, but that was one of my funnest jobs. And we were talking earlier, like I had, throughout my career, I had a lot of cool titles and a lot of fancy stuff and bright stuff on my collars, but it was that end of that leash, being that dog handler was one of the highlights of my career.
Is there a favorite story you have from being a canine handler?
Yeah, I do. Let me finish this route here. So went there, I promoted to senior patrol agent in West Texas in Sierra Blanca Station. The town has less than 500 people, one paved road. We had to get a P.O. box. We were P.O. Box 3. And back then in 1999, you wrote your family what your new address was. We got one letter back saying, how small of a town do you live in? Your P.O. Box 3. Promoted back to a supervisor back in Lordsburg, went up the ranks, and ended up commanding throughout my career. Every sector, there's 20 sectors, and each sector has multiple stations. I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he's like, I think you've got the record. I was a patrol agent in charge of 5 Border Patrol stations throughout my career. Truth or Consequences, New Mexico; Albuquerque, New Mexico; Isleta, Texas, which is in a suburb of El Paso; the Casa Grande Border Patrol Station in Arizona; and I started the 3-Point Station in Arizona. So I did not realize that. Typically 2 or 3 stations was the max, but he said, Dad, no one's ever had 5 that he knows of in modern times. From there, I went to Washington, D.C. From Casa Grande, Arizona, I went to Washington, D.C. as associate chief. D.C., you age in dog years, no pun intended, right? We're going to talk about the dog. I did 2.5 years there. I wanted to get out. I was promoted to the deputy chief of the Border Patrol in New Orleans, Louisiana. So different environment, but that was my hometown, so it was close to Houston. So it was good to run that, different operations. Came back to Tucson as an assistant chief for about 11 months when they promoted me into the senior executive service. I took over as the deputy chief in El Paso, 2018, 19, and most of 20. Was the acting chief in Big Bend before I got the call to be the chief patrol agent in Yuma, Arizona. I did that for 2 years until I retired. I had intel officer, firearms instructor, but I never did like the big sector details or anything. I mean, I did some recruiting stuff, but most of my time was always in the dirt in small stations. I wasn't always a fan favorite because I was really just get it done. You know, I was kind of, my wife always told me, you know, because she just retired, by the way, after nearly 30 years as a public educator and special education director. But she always kind of told me, like, hey, you get your loving at home.
Yeah.
You got to go to work. And it's the same thing with Border Patrol. You know, I mean, the list of friends is a lot shorter probably than the list of enemies when it came down to how Chief Clem ran things, right? Because we had a mission, right? I was mission people self. You know, and there's people, oh, it's mission first, people always. I get that, but you know, that's the way I always operated. But you asked a question about a favorite canine story, and I had canine Onyx, and he was a German Shepherd Malinois mix, and you know all about the Maligators and how crazy they are. But this Onyx, his playing weight in the summer was about 85. In the winter, he'd puff up to about 90. Over the course of our career together, I wasn't his first handler. I was his second handler, and I had him for about 4 years. We seized over probably like 12,000 pounds of marijuana from 97 to 2001. Coke wasn't a big thing in the areas that I worked back then, so I just had like maybe 100 kilos of Coke, some meth, probably thousands of people. He loved tracking. Mal wanted to air send in him, but the German Shepherd in him wanted to put that nose down and track, right? But my favorite story was probably one of the smallest seizures we've ever had. It was like 2.5 pounds of marijuana. But we had intel. I was working in New Mexico in the Boot Heel, Antelope Wells Port of Entry down in the Boot Heel of New Mexico. It was still a dirt road to get down there. Now it's paved. This was 1998, maybe 1999. And we had intel that there was a mule train that was coming up twice a week, dropping off bundles about 100 yards from the highway, about a half mile north of the border. Because we caught somebody that went down to pick it up. And it's like, yeah, we're told if we come out here at a certain time and honk the horn and yell pollo, people will come out and load the dope up. I'm like, that just sounds completely made up. But I'm going to go out there and check it out. So I went out there the next day. It's a beautiful sunny day, not a cloud in the sky. It's close to noon. And dog had been in his kennel in the Jeep the whole time, so we're ready to get out there. I'm going to go walk the border fence. And in the meantime, I took his Kong ball, and I was going to do the Hundauslaufen. You know, dog's out running. He was just going to have fun. I'm looking for sign or any indication that there's a trail there. So I threw that Kong, and I see it bounce, and he goes and gets it, and he comes back, and you know, we tug a little bit, and he lets it go, and I throw it a second time, and I just see it bouncing. First thing in my mind is like, that's a $20 Kong ball. I'm going to have to go pay that dog. Where's the dog? And you know, they were passive indicators, the detection dogs, and he had some shoots and training earlier on before Border Patrol got him, so he had a little bit of, you know, a broad knowledge base of, and so I could call him and get a bark out of him. And it's high noon. I have to tell you that for a reason, because it's this bright, you can't see anything. I'm like, Onyx, where are you? And I finally get a bark. And I find him. He's about 75 yards away from me, and he's just sitting there. I'm like, what the heck? He's indicating. So I get over there, and I'm looking around, and I don't see anybody. I'm immediately thinking there's got to be people here. I'm like, this guy that told us this intel, he's probably right. And he's just looking at me and looking down, looking at me, looking down. And it's high noon. I take my sunglasses off. I got my hat on. I don't see anything. And I'm like, where's Keith? Where's Keith? That was the command at the time. And he's getting frustrated. And he starts barking, and I kick around. I move some dirt around. There was a partial part of a bundle that had been removed. That was basically where people were sitting there, you know, stashing the stuff. There was no other dope. But he had found that, you know, that little 2.5 pound chunk that was out of a bigger bundle. And I was like, this dog's incredible. Here we are playing.
Yeah.
He's, you know, just getting the Kong ball. I'm pissed because I'm about to pay for a $20 Kong ball, and it wasn't like they had though. I could buy those in Lordsburg, and there was no Amazon back then. So, but yet here he was engaged as soon as he caught that odor that he'd been trained to detect. And then, I mean, yeah, there was a lot of cool seizures and big seizures and stuff, but to me that was my favorite story because this dog was trained and knew what he needed to do, and we were just out there playing. He was like, "Oh, Dad, I got something." Yeah. And to me, I mean, some people's like, well, you know, I caught this, you know, 10,000 pound load or this, you know, concealed compartment. Yeah, we caught plenty of concealed stuff. That was just trained to do. And for me, completely disengaged from the enforcement side, I was tracking, but I just wanted him to play, have some fun. get out and run.
Yeah.
And he went, whoop, there it is right here, Dad. And so it was like 2.5 pounds. And, we did find eventually found the trail and saw where this could be legit and found some other layup spots. We didn't find any more dope that day, but the 2.5 pounds was pretty cool, only because of the situation, how otherwise, we caught plenty of roaches and joints and ashtrays and things like that on vehicle stops, but it was that little small seizure that to me was like the highlight, because that dog knew what he was doing. I realized how great, number one, his trainers were, and how engaged this dog was, even when he didn't need to be engaged. And I really was just really trying to think this guy's lying to us. There's no trail out here, and sure enough, we found the trail and found where he'd found that stash. So it was just kind of cool.
That's super.
Dogs are amazing.
Yeah. Did you get to retire him?
I did get to retire him. He actually, I think he lived to, he was almost 14 years old.
Wow.
And we kept him. He was retired with us longer than he worked with us, just because 7 years was a pretty long year for a working dog. And he was turning 7. It was the day we had to put him down. It was like when the doctor was like, okay. Like every seizure that he and I'd ever made together, and every situation where he may have made a difference where I was going to have to engage somebody or not, because like I said, he had some training flashed before my eyes. I know I had the timeline, but I got to tell you one funny story that I know you will appreciate. We were doing Operation Boot Heel in, I think it was 1998, with the Air National Guard out of New Mexico. And there was back then, it's no longer there, but the Playas, New Mexico had a big Phelps Dodge smeltering system there. And the smokestack you could see 20 miles south of the border, and they would guide off that. It was a known dope trail. So we had ground sensors out there, and we'd been catching a lot of dope in the Boot Heel. And so Air National Guard was they had their night vision goggles and doing all their fancy stuff with their new birds. And I was working that zone that night when some sensors went off. And these sensors were typical backpacker sensors. And there was a primary, secondary, and tertiary sensor. And by the time that second one went off, that's when you kind of perk up. Like, okay, this could be something good. So the Air National Guard, hey, do you want us to respond? We're like, yeah, respond. I'm the closest, vehicle. The tertiary sensor goes off, and it's almost, this is money. This is going to be a good dope case, right? So I'm driving in with my Jeep. I hear the bird up in the air. They're flying way high using night vision. They're not even lit up with anything. And we're talking back and forth on the radio. And they're like, hey, we see you there. I was Lima Kilo 23. And they're like, Lima Kilo 23, we got you. And I was like, all right, well, and we didn't have a long leash policy back then. I could let the dog off leash. And so I let him off leash, and I let him kind of use the bathroom, get him all ginned up. All right, let's go, boy, let's go. And so I know where the sensor is, so I'm heading that way, and the bird says, all right, we've got some heat. Looks like it's going to be a legit group. And they said, well, when I get you and your partner, talking about the dog, in the same screen, we'll light up. They had their big night sun and all that stuff. We'll come down. I'm like, perfect. So, the dog, I can see he's on to something, right? And he's starting to run. And now, of course, I'm running now. And like, okay, we got you, you and your partner on the screen, we're going to light up. I said, light up. And he's like, he's on it. And they put this big old night sun thing, boom. And I just smelled the most god-awful smell. It was a dead bloated cow.
Oh, man.
And you know what a 90-pound German Shepherd Malinois mix likes to do to a dead bloated cow?
And dive right into
that big bloated cow. And it burst.
Oh, God.
And he's just rolling in it. And I'm like, oh, my God. And they's like, what you got? What do you got? I'm like, it's a dead cow. I said, and then they're like, other agents are calling, hey, should they show up? I'm like, stay away. And so the bird flies around. There's actually just south of where the cow was, where the sensor was, there was 4 or 5 different cows walking through there. So that's basically, there was no people. It was just the cows had taken that same trail, and he burst that cow open. Now, we lived in a ranch probably about 15 miles north of where this incident happened. And I rarely would call my wife on shift because she knows, you never want to get phone calls. But I called her and I said, hey, everything's fine, but can you put the pine sol and, dish soap out. She's like, what happened? I'm like, just don't even come outside, you know? So I had to get this nasty dog into my Jeep, drive up to the house and end up washing him out. He was so proud of himself, what he was doing. But it was the funniest thing because that dog was just like, again, the National Guard. I'm like, gee, thanks guys, appreciate that. Now I'm pretty much out of commission for the next hour as I'm getting this. And of course, the setup in my Jeep, you know, was not an ideal kennel setup for the dog. So I had guts and stuff everywhere. It just stunk for days. Ugh.
Yeah, anyway. no amount of anti-skunk treatment's going to get rid of that.
Yeah, I know. It was
2 weeks.
It was it was quite a I had to change uniforms because I mean I had to trying to get him. It was just it was gross. It was gross.
Man,
you'd appreciate that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been through it for sure. Yeah. To me, there's nothing worse than a rotted armadillo. Like, I don't know what it is about those in particular that just, God, they're terrible. But such a fascinating career, and I wish we had more time. But is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have?
No, I mean, I think we covered. There's not enough hours in the day to go over what we're dealing with. I mean, I'll tell you that, you know, so I did my career with the Border Patrol, and I had a couple years of retirement, and then came back. The fight in me never ends, you know, just the roles and responsibilities I have now. So I'm going to continue to be out there. I will do the news interviews. I will do continue to talk about it if people like yourselves can give me the platform to do it. I do believe in giving back. One of the things, especially when we're talking about the kids, one of the reasons why I was in Texas is Riptide Society is a group that helps victims of trafficking, but really people that are in the foster care system that age out, because we don't do enough about that for people that don't have the family ties and stuff. So it all kind of plays in where, you know, you come full circle, right? You've been on the enforcement side and you realize that there's a better way of doing things, and so that's something I'm very proud of. As a friend of mine started this organization, and it gives back to these families, and some of these families, while they're not the children that are in the foster care weren't illegally in the United States, but they were still part of a system that doesn't take care of our most vulnerable. And so, again, being married to a lifelong educator, it's just a passionate thing for me. Yeah. And so I'm able to kind of find some really good space in life to give back as well with my time and support. I'm always going to be an advocate for the men and women in uniform, the mental health for both our law enforcement and our military. There's a lot of good to be done out there, and I'm glad that people like yourself have given me an opportunity and a platform to talk about the good things that we can do. I would say this, that I no doubt that your audience supports what we're talking about here, but to continue to thank the men and women that wear the uniform, whether it's our military, state, local, domestic, or even the federal agents that are out there doing this job, because this country has not been good to them lately. The administration is great, and the people that support the administration are great, but you know, there's a human being behind that badge. Yeah. There's a heart, and there's a husband, there's a wife, there's a brother, there's a sister that can always use that pat on the back. And while we're not soft and we're pretty hard with all this stuff and jaded to life, still a human being. Yeah. And so I encourage anybody that supports what we're trying to accomplish when it comes down to law and order to also support that individual that's doing that job and their interests and things like that. And so that's just something, there's life out there. Life's meant to be lived. I'm always going to, come back to my base, and that's, securing our border and taking care of the men and women that do that. But also want to make sure that we just live our life and not in fear, but just in gratitude, and really do some good things.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I appreciate wrapping up with that sentiment. I do have some swag for you.
Oh, all right, man.
So if you find yourself wearing some shit kickers back in Arizona, the box is a little tricky to open, but
man, this is great, and thank you for the coin. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I will. Should I open this now?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if you're into wearing cowboy boots. And
I do. I just you just got me looking like a surfer today because I was. When you were at a Riptide organization, it sounds kind of cool, right? So we were.
It's the front.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. Well, check that out.
Yeah. Yep. So.
That is heck yeah.
So there you go. Commemorative mic drop buckle. Thanks.
Heck yeah.
John
Well, guess
Johnson.
what? I'm gonna have to go get me. I'm in Texas still.
Yeah.
Between here and the airport, I'll
Yeah.
have to go get me an updated belt, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is gorgeous, man.
Yeah.
Thank you. I will wear this. I'll wear this proudly, man.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
You got it, man. Thank
Has anybody ever told you kind of look like Ben Affleck's older brother with a beard?
No, never heard that one. I've heard.
Some of it might be the lighting. I mean, because I saw your official picture
Yeah.
with no beard and,
Yeah.
and don't notice a similarity, but
Yeah.
sometimes sitting here, like, especially when you smile, not
Yeah.
to make it weird, but yeah, just, I don't know.
I have ever heard
Coming
that
is
one.
fine.
I've heard when I don't have the beard, Patrick Swayze. What's his name is with Kurt Russell, I think, is one. With the beard, they say if there's ever going to be a remake of Hunt for Red October, I could do Sean Connery's
There
role
you
there,
go.
which is funny because I just completed a movie.
Oh, really?
I was a boxing announcer and commentator. Francesca Eastwood stars in it with Alex
cool.
Wraith and Bianca Von Dam. So I'm kind
Awesome.
of part of Wraith Films. I'm in their casting crew. We're doing another one, a Western, and working on another real life situation disaster movie. Never thought in a million years I would do any kind of acting, but it's not Hollywood. It's independent stuff, and I mean it's an Eastwood.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
Clint's
tough to
daughter.
beat.
I
Yeah.
mean, why wouldn't I not want to do something that has to do with an Eastwood and
sure,
Von
yeah.
Dam?
Yeah.
I mean, why not? So it's an opportunity to give back, and if I make $1 out of it, I can donate it.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
the thing. So
Yeah.
I'll be wearing this belt buckle in one of the scenes. You can.
Yeah, I would love it. Awesome. We'll post it for sure. So,
Absolutely.
Thank you again for coming. I appreciate it. Appreciate the family being patient. And to the listener and viewer, I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you didn't, you can choke yourself. And until next time, this is Mic Drop.